The chainsaw cracked before its time. Vance heard it by sound, not by sight. A sharp snap, deep, coming from inside the trunk, not from the blade. The pine had almost a 3-foot base, and he'd felled 300 just like it. And a tree that's gonna fall right doesn't talk like that. It talks with a long groan, a fiber rip that comes from the cut. That one cracked on the wrong side, on the side opposite the notch, like bone snapping from the inside. He pulled his finger off the trigger right away. The chainsaw dropped to idle, purring against his thigh. Blue smoke rising into the cold morning air. "Kenny!" he called, without raising his voice more than necessary. "Get out of the line." The other guy was about 30 feet away, gathering branches. He looked up slowly, the way someone does when they don't understand. "Get out of the line, man." Vance didn't even look to see if the man obeyed. He was reading the trunk. The tree had a lean he hadn't liked from the start, a belly toward the slope, and the overnight rain had left the ground too soft up top. He'd made the notch right, the mouth facing downhill, counting on the tree falling cleanly down the slope, but the crack came from the uphill side. The root was letting go. The whole thing was going to twist. When wood starts to twist, there's no running in the direction you planned. There's getting away from the stump. The stump is what kills. The stump kicks back when the trunk goes, and whoever's behind it takes a 2-ton blow to the chest. Vance killed the saw, held it close to his body by the handle, and took 3 wide steps to the side, uphill, against the logic of fear. Because fear says go down, and going down there was dying. The pine went. It didn't fall straight. It twisted half a palm in the air, like he'd predicted, and the whole base lifted off the ground in a heave that threw dirt and roots upward. The trunk came down in a crash he felt through his boots before he heard. And where Kenny had been gathering branches, now there was a mattress of broken crown, green needles, and dust. Silence. The echo climbing up the valley. "Kenny, I'm alive." "Fuck!" The voice came from under the branches, angrier than scared. "I'm alive. Barely, but I'm alive." Vance closed his eyes for a second, opened them, set the saw on the ground, leaning against the stump, and went to pull his partner out of the crown by the arm. Kenny came out scratched on the forehead, a thin line of blood running down to his eyebrow, cursing the tree's mother, the slope's mother, and Winter's mother. He was whole. Whole was what mattered. "It was letting go at the top," Vance said. "The ground was saturated, couldn't see it, could hear it." "Hear what, shit?" "The crack. It came from the opposite side of the cut." He shrugged, his way a minimal movement. "When it comes from the opposite side, it's going to twist. Always." Kenny spat sideways, wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, and looked at the blood on his skin like it belonged to someone else. He was in his 20s, strong as an ox and stubborn in equal measure, had worked with Vance for 2 winters, and still hadn't learned to listen to the wood. Some never learned. Those usually stopped working the woods early, one way or another. "You've got ears like a bat, Brum," Kenny said. "I've got ears of someone who wants to get home." It was a little after 7. The whole mountain was steaming with fog, that July cold that gets in through the seams of your clothes and stays. Harlan's lumber yard was down there, at the end of the dirt road, and from up there you could see the tin roof of the shed. The yard stacked with logs, and farther off, At the bottom of the valley, the first houses of Pine Brook scattered like dice thrown on a table. Smoke from wood stoves rose straight up. A still day, no wind. After that bad wind, in the dawn, Vance took off his helmet, ran a hand through his hair, wet with sweat and fog. He was a 44-year-old man with the body of someone who'd never worked, sitting down. Broad shoulders from the axe, thick hands, 3 fingers on his left hand flattened from a lifetime of missed hammer strikes. His face, that one, had more age than his document said. The woods age your skin. He took the file from his vest pocket and started running it along the chain teeth. Right there, sitting on the stump that had almost killed Kenny. Habit, idle hands bothered him. While he filed, he listened to the valley. And it was while listening that he noticed what was wrong. It wasn't a sound. It was the absence of one. Dave hadn't answered the radio. "Kenny, where's Dave?" He was in the lower clearing, marking the logs for the truck. Kenny tied a rag on his forehead. "Why?" "I called him twice on the radio before dropping this one to move the tractor." He didn't answer. "Oh, he's probably taking a leak." Dave doesn't put down the radio even to take a leak. It was true, and they both knew it. Dave was the oldest there after Mr. Harlan, 50-something, married to the owner of the general store in Pine Brook, and he carried the radio strapped to his shoulder the way someone carries a child. He talked all the time, sang on the radio, told old jokes on the radio, warned about every stick he stepped on. Dave, silent, was something that didn't exist. Vance put the file away, slung the axe across his back. Not the saw. The axe, his father's. A hickory handle worn smooth by 3 generations of hands. Because in thick woods, the axe works better than the saw and doesn't need fuel to solve a problem fast. Old habit, too. He left the saw by the stump next to the fuel mix. "Stay here," he told Kenny. "Finish stripping the crown. I'm going down to check on Dave." "Want company?" "I want the work done. The truck comes at noon." Half a lie. He didn't want company because, not knowing exactly why, he'd started to feel that fine thing at the nape of his neck. The thing the woods teaches, and that has no name, and that he could only describe as the way birds go quiet an instant before something enters a clearing. The birds had gone quiet. He went down the skid trail, the ground soft with needles, the smell of resin strong in the cold. 100 and some feet to the lower clearing. He listened to his own steps like someone hunting, even though he didn't know what he was hunting. The lower clearing was a cut opened a week ago, round of stump and sawdust, with about 20 logs stacked waiting for the truck. The tractor was there, stopped, engine off, which was already strange because Dave never shut off the tractor mid-job. It cost more to restart it than to leave it running. Dave? Nothing. Dave's lunchbox was on the ground, overturned, rice spilled on the sawdust with ants already arriving. And the radio. The radio was on the ground, too, about 6 feet from the box, its little red light still on, still calling. Vance stopped at the edge of the clearing. His hand closed around the axe handle without him telling it to. There was a man down behind the log pile. You could see the boots. Dave's boots, those work boots he swore he'd replace every year since last year. "Dave!" Now, loud. The voice hit the wall of woods and came back. The boots moved. Not the way someone wakes up. The way someone is pulled from inside. Dave's body dragged itself out from behind the pile in an awkward, uncoordinated movement, elbows first, scraping his belly on the sawdust. And when the head appeared, Vance understood, without understanding anything, that this wasn't a fainted man trying to get up. Dave's neck had a gash on the side and the curve between shoulder and ear. Not a cut, a tear. Flesh missing, the black shirt crusted with dried blood at the edges, stopped bleeding. And that was the worst part, because a body that stops bleeding like that is a body with no heart beating to push the blood. And Dave was getting up. Dave, stay down. Shit, stay down. I'm going to... Vance took a step forward, his head still trying to build a story that made sense. Accident. The tractor. Something fell, crushed. The man's in shock. I call for help. I carry him on my back down the mountain. Dave, I'm here. Stay still. Dave raised his face. The eyes were open, and there was nobody behind them. That was the detail Vance would carry afterward every night for weeks. Not the wound, not the blood, not the smell that was already starting. Sweet, sour, wrong. The eyes. Dave's eyes were always the eyes of someone about to laugh. Those were the eyes of a fish at the market. Frosted glass turned toward him without recognizing him. Dave's mouth opened, and what came out wasn't words. It was a wet, long, hungry wheeze, and he came. He came slow. That was the only thing that saved Vance in that first second. The slowness. Dave had always been quick with words and hands. What had his face came dragging one leg that didn't bend right, arm extended, fingers opening and closing in the air, like someone groping in the dark. Slow, but coming, without stopping, without the slightest sign of fear, pain, or doubt. The three things that make a man stop. Dave! Vance's voice came out cracked. It's me! It's Vance! Nothing in the eyes. The wheeze, the dragging step. Closer. Vance's body decided before his head. He stepped back, raised the axe half a palm, and the part of him that was still Dave's neighbor, the man who'd drunk beer at Dave's house on Christmas, that part screamed to drop the tool, that it was crazy, that it was Dave. The other part, the woods part, the part that hears the crack on the wrong side of the trunk and gets out of the line before the head understands, that part gripped the hickory handle tight and didn't let go. Stop, Vance said, almost a plea. Stop, Dave. Stop there. The thing didn't stop. And up on the mountain, Kenny's engine roared again, loud, calling through the whole woods and far off toward Pine Brook. At the bottom of the valley where the smoke rose straight came the first siren that place had heard in many years. One, then two, then many, overlapping, coming from far away from the big city down there toward the highway. Vance didn't take his eyes off what had been Dave, but he heard the sirens, and he didn't know yet there, with his father's axe half raised and the sweet and sour smell filling the sawdust clearing, that he was hearing the world end. The clock of time marks it like this. That was the first day, but not the first sign. The first sign had been 3 days earlier, and Vance, like everyone in Pine Brook, hadn't paid attention. Marina had mentioned it at breakfast with that face of someone who notices things. 11 years old and a pair of eyes that let nothing pass. Inheritance from her mother, Teresa said. But Vance thought it was his, the habit of listening before looking. Dad, the teacher didn't go again. The girl stirred her milk with bread in it, a habit Teresa scolded, and Vance pretended not to see. Third day, and Tommy said his dad, who's a nurse down at the hospital in town, slept there these days, didn't come home. Flu season, Teresa had said from the sink. Every July it's like this. Hospitals fill up. Mrs. Higgins at the clinic said it's not normal flu. Marina looked up from her plate. She said people are biting. Biting? Vance had almost laughed. Biting what? The others. The girl, Lechuel, said it is serious. the way kids say serious things, and Teresa told her to stop making things up and eat because the school bus came at 7. But the school that day, 3 days earlier, had sent the kids back in the middle of the morning. Teacher shortage, they said, and the town bus hadn't come up the mountain that day or the next. And the TV signal at night kept cutting out, and when it worked, it was always the same nervous woman on the news talking about outbreak, about don't leave home if possible, about seek help at first symptom of high fever with confusion. And Teresa turned it off because it scared the girl. And Vance went to bed early because a lumberjack's dawn starts at 5:30. Outbreak or no outbreak, the pine doesn't cut itself. Now, in the clearing, 3 days later, with his father's axe half raised against the dead neighbor who walked, Vance understood something he would carry like a stone in his pocket for the rest of his life. The girl had warned him, and he'd told her to eat. The thing that had been, Dave got too close. Vance struck. It wasn't a lumberjack's blow, it was a scared man's blow. Sideways, poorly braced, and the axe grazed Dave's shoulder, opening flesh without any blood gushing, just a dark slit, and the arm hung crooked. And Dave didn't stop, didn't grunt in pain, didn't hesitate half a step, kept coming with the ruined arm swinging, mouth opening and closing in that wet wheeze. And right then, in that exact instant, the last part of Vance that thought the man could still be saved died for good. A living thing recoils when it hurts. A living man recoils when it hurts. This thing didn't recoil. Vance pushed him back, stumbled over a stump, fell, sitting in the sawdust with Dave on top of him. The dead man's hands closed on the thick sleeve of his flannel shirt. The mouth came toward his neck, exactly where Dave's own neck had been torn, and Vance felt the breath. Not breath, a blast of old meat of a butcher shop closed in the heat. And the nausea rose with a strength he didn't know he still had. He put the axe handle across between himself and the mouth, pushed. Dave's teeth bit into the hickory, scraped the wood, chipped it. He had a broken tooth, the upper canine Dave broke years ago, opening beer with his thumbnail, and laughed every time he told the story. "I'm sorry," Vance said. It was all he could manage. He twisted his body, threw his weight, rolled on top, and got Dave off him, jumped up in one motion, out of breath, and when Dave turned on all fours to restart the chase, still on the ground, his nape was exposed, the curve between skull and neck. The woods teaches where the thing gives. It gives at the joint. It gives at the fiber. It gives where the structure holds the weight. Vance raised his father's axe with both hands, high, like someone splitting a knotty green log, and brought it down with his whole body. The sound was different from anything he'd ever split. Dave stopped, not slow, not in a last heave. Stopped completely all at once, like an engine shutting off, and the body went limp on the sawdust and didn't move anymore. It was the head. Vance didn't know yet that it was always the head, but his body stood there, panting, with the axe embedded, and the woods part inside him filed the information without asking permission. The head. Where the thing lives, it's in the head. The rest is just meat that walks. He couldn't get the axe out on the first try. He had to put his boot on the shoulder of what had been his friend and pull with both hands. When the blade came free, he turned sideways and vomited his breakfast into the sawdust, right next to Dave's spilled lunch rice. And the ants, who knew nothing of any outbreak, were already working on both. Kenny came running down when the radio started crackling with Vance's voice, choppy, no word that made sense. He reached the clearing and stopped at the edge like Vance had stopped, and it took what seemed like a long time to piece together what he was seeing. Dave on the ground, his head opened, and Vance sitting on a log with the axe between his knees and his hands shaking in a way that didn't match that man. What did you... Kenny didn't finish. Brum, that's Dave. What did you do? He was already dead before. Vance didn't even lift his head. Look at his neck. Look, he was dead and got up and came at me. I didn't... His voice failed. I didn't do anything that didn't need doing. You killed Dave. He was already dead. Now Vance stood, and his voice filled the clearing, and Kenny stepped back. Look at the neck shit. Look at his color. Look at his eyes. You think that's fainting? You think that was going to a hospital? Kenny looked. It cost him, but he looked. And his face, young and strong and dumb, came apart as he understood what he was seeing. The wound that didn't bleed, the gray skin, the simple and impossible fact that a man with that hole in his neck had been standing. The sirens, Kenny said quietly. Down there. They've been going for half an hour. Won't stop. I heard. Mrs. Higgins said people are biting. I know. Vance wiped the axe blade on the moss slowly because his hand needed something simple to do while his head dealt with the rest. My daughter told me 3 days ago. They stood silent. The tractor engine, now that nobody touched it, cooled with a metallic tick-tick, each one more spaced. Down there, the sirens. Farther still, something new. A deep rumble that took Vance a while to recognize because he'd never heard it there. Helicopter. Several, heading toward the big city, toward the coast, not toward them. Nobody was coming to Pine Brook. Pine Brook was where you fled to, not where rescue ran to. My wife and daughter are home, Vance said, and saying it out loud turned it into urgency, into organized panic, into the only thing in the world. Teresa was taking Marina to the clinic today. The girl had a sore throat. He stopped. The blood drained from him. The clinic, Mrs. Higgins, people biting, Kenny. He was already gathering things, fast, the fuel jug, the chain, the bat, throwing everything in the backpack. Come with me to the bottom. We take the F-150 from Harlan's yard. I drop you at the crossroads. You go your way, I go mine. Can't trust anyone's car on the descent. We take the F-150 because it's high and doesn't get stuck. And Dave? Kenny looked at the body. We're going to leave him like that? Vance stopped, looked at his friend on the ground. He'd been a good man. Sang on the radio. We don't have a shovel, time, or anywhere to take him. His voice came out harder than he wanted, and he softened at the end. I'll come back later. When I can, I'll come back and bury him proper. Right now, my daughter's in a clinic full of people who bite. You understand me? Kenny understood. He had a mother in Pine Brook, too. Harlan's lumberyard was open and empty, which had never happened. The old man, 70-something, owner of all that, usually arrived before the workers and left after, and never in 20 years left the shed gate wide open and the office unattended. Vance knocked on the office door, called, entered. The old man's ham radio was on, spitting static, and every now and then a cut-off voice from someone far away, repeating coordinates and the word evacuation, and the word perimeter, and the word there is no. There is no what? The static 8 on the desk, the F-150 keys on a nail, and next to them, a note in the old man's trembling hand. Went to get Loretta? In Oak Ridge. Take what you need. God help us. Loretta was Harlan's daughter, lived in the neighboring town. The old man had taken the other truck and gone to get his daughter, and left, for them, the F-150, and permission to take everything, Vance felt something tighten in his throat. Gratitude and fear in equal measure, because if Harlan, who was the calmest man alive, had dropped everything and run down terrified after his daughter, then the thing was real. It was big. It was worse than a town siren. "Get water," Vance told Kenny. "There are jugs in the shed. Get everything you can fit in the bed. Tarp, rope, that toolbox, the big machete, and whatever food's in the bunkhouse fridge, take it." "Why all that?" "We're coming back." Vance stopped at the door, keys in hand. Out there, at the end of the dirt road where the road turned to asphalt and dropped toward Pine Brook, something was moving. Coming up. Not a car. People. A handful of people walking up the road on foot, slow, spread out. And even from that distance, there was something wrong with the way they walked. No hurry, no grouping. Each in their own crooked stride, like a drunk, like a sleepwalker, following a sound only they could hear. The sound of the chainsaw, the sound of the tractor, the sound of two living men's voices at the top of the mountain on a still, windless morning that carried noise far. "Because we might not come back," Vance said. "Get everything, fast." The F-150 descended the mountain like a big animal that knows the road. Vance drove with both hands on the wheel and eyes on everything. Kenny sat in the passenger seat, quiet for the first time in his life. The lumberyard's machete across his legs and the bed loaded with what they'd managed to throw in 10 minutes of haste. 3 20-liter water jugs, tarp, 2 pulling ropes, the toolbox, a sack of beans and rice from the bunkhouse, cans, the saw, the axe, 2 jugs of gas and 1 of fuel mix. The people on the road hadn't reacted to the truck the way people react. They didn't get out of the way. They turned toward the noise all at once, with that slowness of someone pulled by an invisible wire, and started coming. Vance didn't stop to count. He swerved around the first ones by the slope edge, 2 wheels in the brush, and when one threw itself in front of the truck, he didn't slow down. The impact was ugly. Kenny screamed. The body rolled across the windshield, left a stain, fell to the side. Vance looked in the mirror, and the thing was getting up again, leg crooked, starting over. "It won't die," Kenny said. "White, you hit it, and it won't die. I already told you. It's the head, only the head. The rest walks broken, but it walks." Vance gripped the wheel. "Remember that. Could save your life." Pine Brook appeared around the bend, down below, and what he saw made his foot lift off the gas without him telling it. Smoke. Not the straight smoke of the morning wood stoves. Black smoke, thick, from things that shouldn't burn, rising from 2 or 3 points of the little town. A car sideways across the river bridge, doors open, and along the main street, from above, you could see people, lots of them, spread out. And you could see, even from far away, that part of those people was chasing the other part. "Oh my God," Kenny said. "My mother lives on the lower street, right there, the blue 2-story. I'll drop you as close as I can." Vance swallowed. "After that, you're on your own, Kenny. I'm going to the clinic. Listen to me." He spoke fast, because he knew the time for talking was ending there. Make as little noise as possible. They see badly, but they hear from far away, and they smell blood. Walk slow near them, and they confuse you with one of them. Run only to escape, never to attack. One alone you can handle with a machete to the head, sideways, hard. 2 is already too many. 3 is death. Don't try to save anyone who's already been bitten. Can't be done. I saw. Kenny nodded, eyes full of water, And when the truck reached the edge of town, at the corner of the lower street, he opened the door before they'd even stopped. Brum, go. Thank you. Kenny took the machete. For the tree up there. You saved me this morning. I never even thanked you. Go find your mother. Kenny went. He ran crouched along the wall edges, the way Vance had told him, toward the blue two-story. Vance would never see him again. Years later, on the bad nights, he would still wonder if the kid had made it, and the not knowing was one of many stones in his pocket. The Pine Brook Health Clinic was on the square next to the church, and the square was the worst place to be. Vance saw it from far off and parked the truck on the cross street behind the closed bakery, out of the sight line of the open street. Killed the engine. Silence fell like ice water, and in that silence he heard the square, a wet, collective murmur, many of those wheezes together, and over them, every now and then, a human scream cut short. He took the axe, thought about the chainsaw, and dropped the idea. Too much noise, too much fuel, and it kills one at a time, just like the axe, but calls every last one of them. The axe was silence. He took also the smaller machete from the box, tucked it in his belt, filled his vest pockets with whatever might be useful. The file, a roll of thin wire, the steel tape measure, a short piece of rope. Old habit of someone who works the woods, never leave without what fixes things. And he went on foot along the wall edges, the way he'd told Kenny to go. The square was a nightmare of sunny midday. 12, 15, maybe 20 of those things scattered across the lawn, some standing, swaying in place, others bent over what was left of someone. Vance forced his eyes not to see who they were. He knew everyone. In a town of a little over 1,000 souls, you knew everyone. The postmaster's wife, the pastor's youngest son, the man who fixed bikes on the corner. There was no crossing the square, but the clinic had a back entrance on the church street where the ambulance bay was. Vance went that way. The back door was ajar. Inside, dark, smelling of blood and disinfectant and that sweet sour he was learning to hate more than any smell in the world. He entered sideways, axe raised, controlling his breathing, stepping on the edge of his foot to keep from making noise. "Teresa!" he called, in a whisper that hurt how low it was. "Marina." Hallway. Overturned gurneys. A dark pool seeping from a room. A figure moved at the end of the hall, rose from on top of something, turned toward him. White coat. It had been Der Heinrich, who pulled a splinter from Marina's hand 2 winters ago and didn't charge. Now he came dragging his foot, mouth dark. Vance waited. He'd learned fast. Wait for their step. Let them get to the right range and strike sideways. To the temple with force and economy, like someone splitting a fallen knot. The doctor fell. Vance didn't look at his face. He'd already learned not to look at the face. "Dad?" The voice came from a side room, thin, muffled, and Vance almost dropped the axe. "Marina?" "Dad!" She was in a cleaning supply closet behind a shelf she'd shoved against the door. 11 years old, and she'd thought to barricade the door. And that idea later would fill Vance with a pride that wouldn't fit in his chest and an equal dread, because he knew where the girl had gotten her calm, and he didn't want that inheritance for her. He pulled the shell. The girl threw herself at him, and he held her with the arm that didn't have the axe, feeling her small body tremble all over, her throat still inflamed, wheezing, and her suppressed crying. Because even crying, she cried quietly. She'd understood that sound kills. I'm here, sweetheart." He spoke in her ear on a thread. "Are you whole? Did they hurt you? Look at me. Did they bite you? No, no. She shook her head. I ran. Mom told me to run and hide and not come out for anything. Mom told him to. Vance held the girl half a palm away, cupped her face. Where's your mother? And by the way the girl stopped breathing, he knew before she said. Teresa was in the triage room. Vance told Marina to stay in the closet, door ajar, small machete in her hand. If anything comes in that isn't me, you hit it in the head with everything you've got, and don't stop hitting. And went alone. His wife was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, under a faded child vaccination poster. She was alive. Her eyes found Vance's, and they were still her eyes. And that was the best and worst thing. Vance. Her voice was small. You came. I came. He knelt. We're leaving. I brought Harlan's truck. Get up, honey. No. She raised her hand slowly, and on her hand, on her forearm, near the elbow, was the mark, an arc of human teeth, deep, flesh open, and around it the skin was no longer skin-colored. It was the color he'd seen on Dave that morning, climbing up her arm like ink in water. I can't, my love. Vance opened his mouth. Nothing came out. It was protecting her. Teresa spoke fast because she also knew the time for talking was ending. She always knew things before he did. The nurse turned on me right in front of me, grabbed Marina by the hair. I put my arm in. A small, tired smile. Her smile from when he did something foolish. I always put my arm where it shouldn't be. We'll cut. Vance already had the steel tape measure out of his pocket, the rope, his head spinning fast. The woods part looking for a solution, the way it looks for a way out of a ravine. Above the bite. I tourniquet, I cut the whole arm off. I've cut worse. Vance. She said his name with so much weight, he stopped. It's already reached my chest. It's hot in here. The shaking's starting. Her hand was shaking, in fact, and he hadn't seen or hadn't wanted to see. There's no time, and I won't let Marina see this. You're going to take her out of here before. I'm not leaving you. You are. And now her voice, she hardened, became the voice that put the house in order. The voice he'd obeyed for 13 years. You're going to take our daughter, and you're going to go back up the mountain, where you belong, where you know better than anyone, and you're going to keep her alive. That's what you're going to do. That's the only thing. Promise me. Vance cried without making noise, because even for crying, he'd already learned on that morning of a single day that felt like a lifetime to cry without making noise. Promise, Teresa said. I promise. And one more thing. She closed her eyes for an instant, gathered strength. When I turn, don't let me walk around like that. Don't let Marina run into me like that someday on a road. Her eyes opened, deep, steady. You know what you have to do. You already did it today. I saw your clothes. She raised her hand, touched his face, her hand already cold. But not now. Wait for me to go. Let me be me until the end. Then you do it. Fast, with your father's axe, which is clean. Promise that too. He couldn't say the word again. He just pressed his forehead to hers and stayed there. And she ran her fingers through his hair one last time, the way she put the girl to sleep, and her shaking increased slowly, and her breathing grew short. Good. And the town outside wheezed its hunger of 1,000 mouths, and the two of them stayed like that, forehead to forehead, as long as they could. Vance did what he promised. It won't be told here how, because he never told anyone. and because Marina didn't see, and that was the most important thing of the entire day, that the girl didn't see. He left her in the closet, facing the wall, her hand in his until the last possible second, telling her to count to 300 very slowly and not turn around. Count the way he taught her to count the rings of a trunk, with patience, skipping none. And he went back to the triage room and did what had to be done with his father's axe, which was clean, and then sat on the floor beside her for a time that fit no account, and then stood, washed the blade and his face in the sink that still dripped a thread of water, and went to get his daughter. "Where's Mom?" Marina asked, when he pulled her from the closet, facing forward, always forward, his big palm covering the side of her vision like a horse's blinders. "Mom stayed," Vance said. The voice came from a well. "Mom protected you to the end. She told me to get you out of here. We're going to do what she said." "Is she coming later?" "No, sweetheart." The girl didn't ask more. At 11 years old, she'd already seen that morning more than most people see in a lifetime, and she'd understood things Vance would give his soul for her never to understand. She just closed her hand on the hem of her father's shirt and didn't let go, and the two of them went out the back, down the church street, slow, on the edge of their feet. The walk back to the truck was the longest stretch of Vance's life. There was something new on the church street that wasn't there before. 3 of them, standing near the bakery, near the F-150, swaying in place, drawn maybe by the smell of engine oil or just resting in that patch of shade like tired animals. Vance stopped at the corner, pulled Marina behind a low wall, and thought there was no going straight past. Not with the girl. 3 was death, he'd told Kenny, and it was true for a man alone, head-on, fighting. But he wasn't going to fight. He was going to cheat, which is what the woods teaches when strength isn't enough. Sound. They went after sound. Vance took the steel tape measure from his pocket, the 5-meter one, the heavy-duty one, showed Marina quietly in her ear. "Stay here, crouched. Don't move for anything. Count to 100. The girl nodded. He crept to the opposite corner of the street, far from the truck, and threw the tape measure hard against the steel door of a closed warehouse on the other side. The crash was loud, metallic, and it echoed. The 3 turned together and went. Slow, but they went, all 3, toward the noise, leaving the path to the truck clear. Vance ran back, crouched, took Marina by the hand, and the 2 crossed the street and got into the F-150 on the passenger side. The girl first, him after, closing the door with both hands so it wouldn't slam. He sat at the wheel. His hand shook so much he missed the key twice. When the engine caught, the 3 far off turned again. Too late. Vance put it in reverse, then first, and left Pine Brook by the upper road, the one that climbed toward the mountain, leaving behind the square, the church, the clinic, the black smoke, and everything he'd ever had in life, except the small, trembling thing on the passenger seat. They climbed in silence for a long time. The asphalt road turned to dirt road. Low branches scraped the roof. The afternoon cold began to descend with the fog, and the valley fell behind and below with its smoke and its murmur, and the smell of pine returned, and Vance breathed it like someone coming back inside. "Dad," Marina said on a thread, after many miles, "where are we going?" Good question, the best question. He'd been turning it in his head since leaving the town under all the pain, because the woods part of him didn't stop working even for grief. The lumber yard was out, too open, too close to the road, too close to Pine Brook, and the sound of the saw and tractor that morning had already proven the noise from there carried down the valley and called. No town worked, nobody's house worked, but there was a place. Your grandfather's, Vance said. My father's house, up high, where we used to fish when you were little. Remember, the wooden house by the creek. That one? He nodded slowly, building the map in his head as he spoke. It's far from everything. No road gets there, just a skid trail, and the last 2 kilometers are on foot or by tractor. Nobody goes up there by mistake. There's water year-round. The creek doesn't dry up. There's firewood that never runs out, which is what there's most of. And it's on a ridge with thick woods on one side and a cliff on the other. His voice gained strength as he saw it. Anyone who wants to get there has to come by the trail one at a time, in a line, in the Narrows. And I know every inch of that trail with my eyes closed. My father taught it to me before I knew how to read. Are there zombies there? Vance looked at his daughter. It was the first time either of them had used the word. Marina had learned it from cartoons, from games, from movies she shouldn't have seen at a friend's house, and the word of make-believe, of play, now served for the real thing, and that, in some dizzy way, was the thing that hurt Vance most on that entire day of things that hurt. That his daughter had a ready word in her mouth for this. Maybe there are some, he said, because he decided in that instant on a rule he would follow with her for the rest of his life. Never lie about danger. Lying about danger took away her weapons. But it's far and it's high, and they climb slopes very badly. Their legs don't work right. I saw today. They fall. Climbing a ridge for them is hard. For us too, who know how to walk in the woods, it's easy. He reached out and tucked her hair behind her ear, the way her mother used to. And the girl closed her eyes for an instant. We'll be okay there. It'll be work, but we'll make it. It wasn't entirely true, the part about we'll be okay, but the part about it'll be work that was entirely true. And Vance figured that half-truth in that new world was already a luxury he wouldn't be able to afford many times. They stopped climbing when the light ran out. Vance didn't want to drive in the dark on the skid trail. One mud hole, one rock, one branch in the radiator, and they'd be on foot with everything on their backs. Far from everything. He parked the F-150 at a tight curve, under a rock wall on one side and thick brush on the other. At a point where you could only get to by a narrow stretch, he could watch. He covered the truck with tarp and branches, more from the habit of someone hiding a cache than from necessity that night. They ate little, a can of sardines split between them, some stale crackers found in Harlan's glove box, water from one of the jugs. Vance made Marina eat more than him. Her throat was still wheezing, and he remembered with a squeeze that she'd gone to the clinic precisely to deal with that, and that now there was no clinic, no medicine, no mother to heat ginger tea with honey and fight with her to drink it. Night on the mountain is black in a way no town knows. No moon, it was pitch dark. The sounds of the woods, the real owl far off, the creek water somewhere, the crack of cooling wood were the same as always, and that comforted, because they were sounds of before, sounds of a world that still worked somewhere. Marina slept, leaning against him on the truck seat, under his jacket and one of Harlan's blankets. Vance didn't sleep. He kept watch, his father's axe between his knees, eyes on the dark, ears open. And it was on that first night, with his daughter breathing on his arm and his wife dead in the valley, that he took from his vest pocket the thing he'd been carrying for 3 days without opening, a cedar block the size of a palm, already roughed out, and the pocket knife. He'd started carving an owl for Marina the week before, for her birthday, which was in August. A lumberjack's hands don't stay idle, and he'd carved wooden animals since he was a boy. Learned from his father. In the same house they were heading to, the owl was half done, missing the wings and the eyes. In the dark, without seeing well, just by touch, the way he read the trunk by sound, Vance opened the pocket knife and went back to roughing. Slowly, chip by chip, a motion his hands knew better than he did. It wasn't time to make a birthday present. It was the least fitting time in the world for that. But his hand needed something simple and good to do, while his head dealt with the rest, the same as that morning in the clearing with the file. And maybe, he thought without letting the thought become words, maybe he just wanted to have at his fingertips a small proof that he could still make something whole in a world that had broken everything in a single day. The cedar chip fell in the darkness with a sweet, clean smell, the exact opposite of the other smell. Day one ended like that. Day two started with frost. Vance woke Marina before the sun, with the cold sunk into his bones and the truck windshield white inside. The girl opened her eyes, and for 1 second only, her face was any kid's waking up, before the memory returned and closed like a door. He knew that second well. He had one just like it. "We're going up on foot from here," Vance said, blowing on his hands. "The trail doesn't fit the truck anymore. I'll carry what fits on my back and come back for the rest later in trips. You just carry your backpack and the water. I'll take the heavy load." He divided the load there on the ground at the curve in the weak light. The rule of who carries in the woods: essentials first, and essentials are water, tools, food, fire, in that order. He put on his back a 20-liter water jug strapped to the frame of a Harlan's cargo pack, and on top the toolbox, rope, machete, saw strapped sideways. His father's axe went on the belt where it always did. Filled his pockets with cans. Marina carried her backpack light in a 5-liter jug she insisted on carrying, and he let her because he knew carrying something was good for the head of whoever carries. The trail climbed 2 kilometers of ridge, thick woods, ground of rotten leaves and exposed root. Vance went ahead, clearing the path, reading the road. Old habit. He didn't just look where he stepped. He looked where he'd step 3 steps from now, and where he could escape if needed, and which branch he could climb, and which rock hid a snake in season. The woods talked to him. It always had. And that was how he ran into the first one up top. It was stuck. The thing had been a man in hunting clothes, a local hunter maybe, or someone who tried to flee into the woods, was tangled in a blackberry thorn bush in the middle of the trail on the steepest part. It had rolled down the ridge at some point, who knows when, and gotten caught by its clothes and its own clumsiness, and now it thrashed there, slowly, without the strength or intelligence to free itself, just repeating the same useless motion against the thorns. Marina stopped behind her father and held her breath. Vance raised his hand, still. And then he did something he would later recognize as the start of his real education. Instead of killing the thing right away or dodging it running, he stopped and watched. He watched that the thing only reacted to them when a branch snapped under Marina's foot. Sound. Before that, even with the 2 of them 10 feet away in its line of sight, it kept thrashing against the thorns as if they didn't exist. Bad eyes. Kenny had been hit by his own mother, maybe because of that. Vance preferred to learn from the dead one stuck in the bush. He watched that, after the snap, it turned its head in the exact direction of the sound, not the bodies. The eyes didn't focus. It was the hearing that aimed. He watched that it tried to come and couldn't climb the 2 meters of slope that separated the bush from the trail. The leg slipped on the wet leaves. The knee didn't have the strength to push the body uphill. Fell, right again, fell, exactly as he'd told Marina in the truck. But now he saw with his own eyes, and seeing was different from guessing. They don't climb ridges. Their machine doesn't have what it takes for that. Look, sweetheart, he said quietly, and it was a calculated risk because he decided right then that she would learn by seeing, not hearing. That fear we understand is smaller than fear we imagine. Look how it can't climb. See? We're close. It wants to come, and it can't climb the slope. Its legs don't obey. That's our strongest side. We live in a place that's nothing but slopes. Remember that. Marina looked for real, her way, and Vance saw the fear in her change form. From terror of an unknown thing to caution of a known thing. It didn't go away. Good fear doesn't go away, but it changed size. Are you gonna kill it? She asked. Vance thought. The thing was stuck, wasn't going anywhere, and the sound of killing, the blow, the thud, carried through the woods and called others. Useless work and free risk. No, he said, it's stuck, can't reach us. Wasting a blow on it makes noise for free and calls the others. He adjusted the load on his back. In the woods, we don't kill what doesn't need to die for us to live. Wastes strength, wastes time, makes noise. We go wide and leave it. They went around the bush on the high side of the trail, well away, and moved on. The thing thrashed behind them for a while longer, then stopped. When the sound of their steps faded, Vance filed everything in the woods part of his head, the way he filed where the water ran and where termites ate the wood. Bad eyes. Good hearing, can't climb ridges, only reacts to sound and movement, forgets quick when the stimulus disappears. Each of those things he knew was a tool. And a tool, for a man who lived by tools, was the difference between living and dying. The father's house appeared around the bend of the trail like a memory that hurts. It was a house of hardwood, logs fitted in the old style, which the old man had raised alone in a single summer when Vance was a boy, and which had endured 40 winters of mountain because it was built by someone who knew. Cedar shake roof, now with moss and some gaps. A single door, thick on the front. 2 small windows built by someone thinking of cold, not views, leaning against the ridge at the back, so the back was pure rock and cliff. Nobody entered from behind. In front, a dirt yard, and then the woods and the cliff of the creek below, from where came the constant good sound of running water. Vance stopped in the middle of the yard and stood there just looking, load still on his back. The last time he'd been there was to close the house after his father died 6 years ago. He'd thought about selling, never did. Couldn't say why at the time. Now he knew. This is it, he told Marina. Your grandfather's house. Now it's ours. The girl entered behind him. It smelled of mold, of dust, of a closed house, but it was the smell of old, clean, dead things, not the other smell, and that, after Pine Brook, was almost perfume. The furniture was still there, covered with sheets and dust, the plank table, 2 benches, the old man's double bed in the bedroom, the cast iron wood stove in the kitchen, rusted but whole. On the wall, hanging from a pair of nails, an old bow saw, a mildewed harness, and the faded photo of the grandfather Marina barely remembered. A man with a mustache and a look of few friends, almost identical to her father. Same way of not smiling for the camera. Are we sleeping here tonight? Marina asked. We're going to live here, Vance said, for a good long while. But before I trusted enough to let you sleep, I've got a lot to do. This house is good, but it's open. Old door, windows without locks, roof with gaps. Before I trust it to let you choose sleep, I'm going to seal it proper." He was already measuring the door with his eyes, then with the steel tape, noting in his head, "Today I work. You're going to help me. 4 hands earn more than 2, and you need to learn, because one day I might not be here to do it." He shouldn't have said the last line. He saw the girl's chin tremble, but he'd promised himself never to lie about danger. And one day I might not be here was the most naked truth of all, and he preferred she carry that truth and discover it suddenly alone the worst way. He knelt in front of her, took from his vest pocket the cedar owl half done, with the wings he'd roughed out the night before, still without eyes. "Look what I was making for you, for your birthday." He put it in her small hand. "It's half done. I'll finish here, at leisure, at night. And while I don't finish her eyes, it's a sign we have work ahead. When I put the eyes on, it's because we're truly home. Deal?" Marina closed her hand on the wingless, eyeless owl. It was cedar. It was soft. It smelled good. It was her father's, and it was a promise of future on a day that had killed every future she knew. "Deal," she said. And it was the first time since the morning at the clinic that the girl didn't cry when she spoke. Vance fortified the house the way you fell a tree, starting with what kills fastest. And what killed fastest, he knew, wasn't the zombie coming through the door. It was him and his daughter being caught sleeping without warning, without a root. So the first thing he did wasn't to lock anything. It was to listen to the house. He walked around it 3 times, slowly, from outside, like someone assessing a trunk before the first cut. Where would a slow, stupid thing arrive? Only from the front, through the yard, through the mouth of the trail. The back was cliff and rock. The sides were thick thornwoods he couldn't cross without a machete. Good. 1 entry point only, like the creek cliff, which protected one whole side for free. The old man's house had been well chosen long before there was any reason to choose well. 1 entry point for the whole property, he told Marina, who followed, noting everything with her eyes. To defend, that's worth gold. I only need to watch one side. Your grandfather didn't know about zombies, but he knew about bad people and animals, and he built thinking about who might come. A good place to defend is a place with few doors. He started with the real door, the house door. The hinges were good. Hardwood doesn't rot easy, but the latch was an old bolt that a strong push could rip out. Vance didn't trust bolts. He trusted weight and geometry. He cut from the old man's bow saw 2 pieces from a cinnamon log in the yard, made 2 U-shaped brackets, screwed one on each side of the jamb, sit at the right height. Not in the middle of the door, but at 2/3 the height, where a body's pushing lever has less force, and fitted a solid wood bar across both brackets. Church door lock. To break that, pushing wasn't enough. You'd have to break the bar or rip out the whole jamb, and neither was something a creature without coordination and concentrated strength could do. A crowd, maybe. 1, 2, 10. No. Why 2/3 of the height and not in the middle? Marina asked. Vance stopped, surprised by the question and pleased by it. Because pushing is leverage, he said. The farther from the fixed point you push, the more force you make. If I lock it in the middle, the door buckles, top and bottom. If I lock it high, there's little free door left to buckle. He slapped the bar. It's the same math as where you hold a pipe wrench. Near the handle, no force. At the tip, it rips the bolt out. Your grandfather taught me with the log lifting lever. Everything in the world is leverage, sweetheart. Whoever understands leverage understands half of things. He didn't board up the windows for good. Light and air are needed. And blind inside a house, you die too. He cut slats and nailed them in a cross pattern, spaced enough to see and breathe, tight enough that an arm couldn't pass and a head couldn't enter. Inside, he made wooden shutters that closed at night, so lamplight wouldn't leak, because light in the dark, he'd already understood, was sound for the eyes. It gave away position from far away. On the second day of work, day 3 of the new world, Vance did what made him most proud: the line. There was no standing watch all night, every night, alone with a child. A man who doesn't sleep makes mistakes. Mistakes kill. He needed a watchman that didn't sleep and didn't eat. He needed to turn sound, which was their weakness, into his weapon. He took the roll of thin wire from the toolbox and every empty can they had, sardine, corn, everything they'd already eaten, punched a hole in each can, threaded a cord, put small stones inside to rattle, and strung the thin wire at ankle height across the mouth of the trail. At the only narrow point, something needed to pass through to reach the yard. Tied from one trunk to another with the cans hanging, strung a second line higher at knee height with more cans to catch anyone who didn't trip on the first. They see badly, he explained to Marina, testing the wire tension with his finger. They won't see the wire, they'll trip. And when they trip, the cans rattle, and we wake up and we have time. He pointed to the narrows of the trail. And look where I put it. Here's the only place to pass because of the thorns on both sides. I don't need to fence the whole house. I just need to watch the funnel. Every creature that comes has to pass right here on my line, making noise. He smiled, and it was almost the first smile since Pine Brook, the dry smile of a competent man who solved a problem. We don't have a fence, but we have the woods acting as fence, and the wire acting as bell. And because sound was their weakness, but also the weakness of those he protected, Vance did one more thing. He taught Marina to live quiet, talk quiet, step on the edge of her foot, close doors with her hand, never with momentum. Put rags under things that scraped. He turned the house into a house of people who don't make noise, and he turned his daughter into a girl who walked like a cat. And that, of the many terrible things that world would teach Marina, was perhaps the first she learned so well she never unlearned it. Water came after the house, but in Vance's head, it came before everything. Food he had for a few weeks, rationing, but water, even with the creek down there singing all day long, was the quiet worry, the one that doesn't scream but kills more surely. Mountain Creek water looks clean and kills slow. Dead animal uphill, animal waste, the contamination that now ran to the rivers with everything happening in the world down below. He built a simple system from what he had, went down to the creek, carefully, always with the axe, always listening, to a point where the water ran hard over rock, which is where creek water is least bad. Filled the jugs at home on the old man's iron stove, boiled everything full rolling boil for the time it takes to say a rosary, which was how his father measured boiling time, and he didn't have a watch worth arguing with. Then ran it through an improvised filter he rigged in a cut jug, small rocks on the bottom, creek sand in the middle, stove charcoal on top, a clean cotton rag over everything. It wasn't a pharmacy filter, but it took out the bulk, and the fire killed the rest, and boiled and filtered water was the difference between dysentery, which, without a doctor, without an IV, without anything, was a death sentence, and staying alive. Water is the first thing and the last thing, he told Marina, filling the already treated bottles and marking each one with a charcoal line so as not to mix treated with raw. Food we can go a few days without. Real thirst 2, 3 days in the head doesn't think straight, and a head that doesn't think in this world dies. He handed her a treated bottle. You never, ever drink from a bottle without the line, even if you're thirsty. Even if I tell you, charcoal line means good water. No line means water that can kill you slower and uglier than any zombie. Understood? Understood. Marina looked at the marked bottle like someone looks at a precious thing. Water is the first thing and the last thing. That's right. Vance nodded. Say that every day until it becomes part of you. At night, with the door locked on the cinnamon bar, the shutters closed, the can line armed at the trail's funnel, and the girl sleeping in her grandfather's bed under a real blanket, Vance sat by the warm stove and went back to the cedar owl. Roughed the curve of one wing. Still much to do. Still a roof to fix, firewood to cut, food to fetch from below, and always the hole the size of Teresa in the middle of his chest that no lever in the world could lift. But the house was sealed. The line was armed. The water had a charcoal mark. And for the first time in 2 days, when his eyes grew heavy, he let himself doze for a few minutes sitting up, axe in his lap, trusting. Just a little, just enough so a man doesn't go crazy. In the systems his own hands had built. On the 4th night, keeping watch by the stove, it was the smell of cedar that brought his father back. The owl was in Vance's lap, the first wing almost done, and every chip that fell from the pocket knife released that sweet, resinous perfume. And the perfume was a door. And behind the door was the old man, alive, mustachioed and stern-faced, sitting on that same bench in that same house 40 years before. Vance was 7 when his father put a pocket knife in his hand for the first time. It's not a toy, the old man had said without any softness, because softness wasn't his nature. A blade is a tool. A tool respects whoever respects it and cuts whoever plays. You cut by pulling the knife away from your body, always. Away. Repeat. Away, the boy had said. And the old man had roughed a piece of cedar in front of him, slowly showing, and from the shapeless block, a bird came out, chip by chip, as if it had been there inside, waiting. And the boy had stood open-mouthed, thinking it the closest thing to magic a man could do with his hands. Years later, Vance understood it was the opposite of magic. It was the most patient craft in the world, removing everything that wasn't the bird until only the bird remained. The old man didn't make the animal. He found the animal in the wood and freed it. The wood already knows what it wants to be, his father used to say. You just help. It was in that house the old man taught everything. How to carve, how to sharpen, how to read the weather in the sky and moisture in the earth. And when Vance was man enough to hold a real axe, how to fell a tree, which was the most dangerous and most beautiful thing the old man knew how to do. A tree isn't an enemy, the old man had said the first time, with the boy already big, the two of them before a huge pine. It's going to fall, that's law. What you decide isn't whether it falls, it's where. Who commands the fall is whoever makes the right notch and leaves the right hinge. Miss the notch, miss the hinge, and the tree decides for itself. And a tree that decides for itself kills the lumberjack. The old man had put his hand on his shoulder, one of the rare touches in a lifetime of few touches. Your life will depend many times on making something big fall exactly where you told it to. Learn that, right? Because it's the most important thing I have to leave you, more than this house, more than this axe. The axe, the same one that now leaned against the wall beside Vance, keeping watch with a hickory handle worn smooth by 3 generations of hands. It had been Vance's grandfather's before his father's and his father's before his. When the old man died in the Oak Ridge Hospital, dry, small in the bed, with lungs that had breathed sawdust too much for too long, the last thing he said, lucid between the mists of the end, was about the axe. "Don't sell it," he'd said, voice already a thread. "Sell the house if you need to, the land, everything, but not the axe. A good axe outlasts a man. That one's buried 2 brums, and we'll bury you too, and then it goes to your son, if you're wise enough to have one." An almost smile on the tired face. "A tool you don't let go of, Vance. In a pinch, it's all that remains between a man and the end. Remember that." Vance had gone 6 years without understanding why he hadn't managed to sell the old man's house, even needing the money, even with Teresa thinking he should. Now, on the 4th night of the end of the world, with his daughter sleeping in the bed where his father died. No, his father died in the hospital, but it was the old man's bed, his bed. Vance understood. He hadn't sold because a part of him, the woods part that knew things before his head, knew that one day he would need a high, hidden place with a single entry point, water that doesn't dry, and firewood that never runs out. The old man had built a refuge 40 years before there was anything to take refuge from, and Vance had kept that refuge without knowing why. "Thank you, Dad," Vance said quietly, into the dark, into the smell of cedar, at the axe leaning against the wall. He wasn't a man who talked to the dead, but he did. "You built this house to save me and didn't even know it. And you taught me to make trees fall where I told them, and I didn't know why, and now I know, and I wish I didn't." The owl's wing took shape under the pocket knife, and Vance, watching his daughter sleep, made a small decision that moved him inside, that pulled him from the bench of memory and put him back on the bench of the present with a direction. He was going to teach Marina everything, not just to hide and walk on her toes and mark water with charcoal. He was going to teach her to carve, to sharpen, to read the sky, and when she was old enough to hold one, to fell a tree exactly where she told it, not because he wanted a lumberjack daughter, but because it was the only inheritance worth a damn. The only thing that outlasted a man, the only thing his father had told him was worth leaving behind. Knowing how to make big things fall where you tell them. In a pinch, it was all that remained between a person and the end. The old man was right. A tool you don't let go of. And knowledge, Vance understood that night, the knowledge that passes from calloused hand to small hand in the same house, under the same smell of cedar, generation after generation. Knowledge was the tool that didn't rust, didn't break, didn't weigh down the pack, and that neither the colonel, nor hunger, nor the dead, nor the whole rotting world down below could take from him. He was going to pass to Marina everything his father passed to him. It was the way to keep the old man alive. It was the way to keep his daughter alive. They were, Vance discovered, chip by chip on that 4th night. The same thing. He put the owl in his pocket, took the axe, felt the familiar weight in his hand, the warm handle of 3 generations, and kept watch until the sun, more whole than when he'd entered the night. Because a man who knows what he has to teach has one more reason to see the sun rise, and reasons in that world were as necessary as water with a charcoal mark. The water tasted like rust from the jug, but it had a charcoal mark, and that was enough. Food wasn't enough. Vance did the math on a board with charcoal, the way he measured log volume. So many cans, so many mouths, so many days. The math was tight, rationing to the bone eating once a day, and badly, it lasted 3 weeks. After that, real hunger, the kind that dizzies, that makes the hand shake at the wrong moment. And a shaking hand in the woods kills. He had to go down. He had to forage. The idea of leaving Marina alone in the house terrified him more than any creature. But taking Hershey to the valley, near the sound and the smell and the crowd, was worse. He turned the problem all night and decided the sealed house with the cinnamon bar. The can line and the girl knowing how to hide and stay quiet was the safest place within a many-kilometer radius, safer than beside him on a road. "I'm going down to get food," he said at breakfast, which was half a can of peaches and syrup split between them. "I'll take the truck, which is still down there, to get what didn't fit on my back. And I'll try 1 or 2 houses on the way, the isolated ones, far from Pine Brook." He looked at her steady. "You stay. Door locked on the bar. Don't open for any sound. If I come back, I knock like this. 3 knocks. Pause. 2. And I say your full name, Marina Brum, with your last name. If I knock different or call and don't say the last name, you don't open, even if it sounds like my voice. Understand? Even if it sounds like my voice. Why not if it's your voice?" Vance hesitated, but a rule was a rule. "Because there are bad people in the world, sweetheart, and the bad world got worse. And because I'd rather you doubt me and be alive than trust wrong and not be." He squeezed her shoulder. "If I'm not back by dark on the second day, don't come looking for me. You take the pack I left ready under the bed, and you go down the north trail, the one that leads to the Oak Ridge Road, and you look for people. I marked the trail with orange tape on the trees, but that's only if I'm not back in 2 days. I will be back." The girl said nothing, took the cedar owl from her pocket. She carried it with her all the time now, and turned it in her hand. "Come back," she said finally. "Just that. I will." Going down alone and light was different. Vance flew on the trail. The dead one, stuck in the blackberry bush, was still there, thinner, darker, clothes rotting along with it. Decomposition was progressing. He noticed the skin sinking into the facial bones, the smell changing from sweet sour to earthy, almost like mulch. He went wide. The thing didn't even react right. Either its hearing was rotting too, or it was simply wearing down, as everything wears down. The F-150 was where he'd left it, intact under the tarp and branches. He loaded the rest from the bed, the jugs, beans, rice, gas, and drove slowly, no rush, down the dirt road, heading for the isolated houses on the hillside, far from Pine Brook's mouth. The first house was a scared failure, a weekend place. Gate kicked in, everything already looted by other hands before his. Drawers on the floor, pantry empty, and on the kitchen wall, written in what he preferred to believe was paint, the phrase, "Nothing left here. Go away." People had been there, desperate people. Vance left fast. A house looted by another living person was a sign there was another living person in the area, and another living person, he was learning, could be worse than dead. The second house saved the week. It was a small farm belonging to an old couple Vance knew by sight, the Benedettis, Italian immigrants who grew everything and raised chickens and pigs and had, he remembered, a cellar of preserves that was legendary in the region. The gate was closed from inside. Bad sign and good sign at the same time. Someone had closed it, so someone had been alive there. But if it was closed from inside and nobody answered, Vance jumped the back wall, axe in hand, and found the answer in the shed. The 2 old people. They'd locked themselves in, and from what he could read in the scene, and Vance read death scenes the way he read trunks, they'd gotten sick, one taking care of the other and gone together without turning. because they died of something that wasn't the bite, or because one did for the other what needed doing before turning. He didn't touch them, took off his hat, stood in silence a moment, and left them in the dark of the shed with whatever dignity remained. But their cellar was a treasure. Tomato preserves, cucumber, eggplant, fruit, cured sausage hanging that still held up, lard in cans, cornmeal in a tin barrel with lid intact, dry, wine, which Vance wouldn't drink but which served to clean wounds, and in a bedroom closet, what made his heart beat differently: a first aid kit from people who lived far from a pharmacy, bandages, gauze, adhesive tape, iodine, sewing needle, and heavy thread, and he held the bottle like someone holds gold, a jar of antibiotics, amoxicillin, expired 2 years ago. But expired was a detail in a world without pharmacies. Expired antibiotics still kill bacteria, just with less force. In a world where a cut could kill, that half-empty jar of Mills was worth more than the whole truck. He loaded everything, filled the bed, and before leaving found 3 live chickens in the coop, scrawny but alive, that had survived pecking at whatever they found. He put the 3 in a box. A live chicken was an egg tomorrow, was protein, was a piece of before that still worked. He got back before dark, as promised. Knocked 3, paused, 2, said Marina Brum through the door crack. Heard the cinnamon bar being lifted from the other side, her thin arms making effort. And when the door opened, the girl was there, whole, small machete in hand, like he'd told her. And behind her, the house was in order, and she had, he noticed, and the notice squeezed his throat, swept the floor, and set the table with her grandfather's 2 plates, as if expecting company, as if this were still a house where a father comes home from work and the daughter set the table. "Did you bring food?" she asked, trying to look adult, failing with 11 years on her face. "Brought food, brought medicine." Vance entered, closed, locked, and brought something better than all that. He went to get the box from the truck bed and set it on the kitchen floor, opened it. The 3 chickens peered out, clucked, stretched their necks, and Marina laughed. It was such a strange sound in the house that Vance stopped mid-motion. A child's laugh, a real one, from good surprise, the first since the morning at the clinic, since the mother. The girl knelt in front of the box and reached out a finger, and one of the chickens pecked, and she pulled her hand back and laughed again and looked at her father with eyes wet in a way that wasn't fear or grief, and said, "Can I name them?" "You can name them," Vance said, and his voice was hoarse for a reason that had nothing to do with road dust. "A chicken with a name lays more eggs, your grandfather used to say." It was a lie. The old man never said that. But Vance decided that from that day forward, whenever he needed a good truth that didn't exist, he would put it in his father's mouth. And his father, dead 6 years, wouldn't complain about lending his voice to make his granddaughter smile. Marina baptized the 3 that night. One was Teresa, and Vance had to go out to get firewood in the dark yard for a minute, alone, before he could come back with a steady face. They ate fried sausage with cornmeal and tomato preserves, the first hot filling meal in 5 days, and for part of that night, with the stove warm and the chickens sleeping in a corner, and the unshaven face smelling of good smoke, the old man's house was almost a place where 2 people were simply alive and not merely surviving. Vance knew it wouldn't last, knew the world down below kept rotting, and the quiet was borrowed, not owned. But that night he let the girl laugh, let the chicken bear her mother's name, ate until he was warm inside, and roughed out another piece of the owl's wing before sleep. The dark hit harder, he knew, on those who'd had a piece of light first, but it was worth it. It was the price. It was what Teresa would have wanted. Day 7, the frost had gone, but the cold stayed. The mountain cold way sunk into rock and wood and bones. Vance woke before his daughter, as always, and lay for a while in the old man's bed listening to the house. He'd learned to read the house by sound the way he read the trunk. The crack of a shake cooling on the roof, the drip of the creek below, Marina's light breathing in the next room, the low clucking of the chickens in the kitchen corner. Sounds of before, sounds of a world that still worked in some small place the size of that house. He stored each morning like someone stores cans in the pantry because he knew they didn't last, and because a man needs a reserve of good mornings to get through the bad nights. It was on that morning, making coffee from a very thin mix of the Benedetti's old grounds, that he ran into the memory of Teresa without meaning to. It was the kettle, the old man's iron kettle, which he put on the stove to heat the water, made the same thin whistle their kettle in the Pinebrook house made, and Teresa, every morning, shouted from the kitchen, "Vance, the water!" And he, in the bathroom, pretended not to hear, just so she'd shout again, angrier, and come get him pulling his ear, laughing. 13 years of that. The kettle whistled in the old man's house, and for 1 second, one whole second, he waited for her voice from the other room. "Vance, the water!" It didn't come. It would never come again. He took the kettle off the fire before it whistled again, not because of the sound that called the dead, because of the other reason, the one without a name, the one that weighed in the middle of his chest like green wood. He stood with his back to his daughter's bedroom door for a while, both hands resting on the edge of the hot stove, breathing, letting it pass. When it passed, because it always passed enough to continue, he poured the thin coffee into 2 mugs, and when Marina appeared, rubbing her eyes, he was already the steady father the girl needed him to be. Grief was after, always after, and the after never came. But that was how you got through. That day, he decided to study the dead up close, on purpose, with a cool head. It wasn't curiosity, it was craft. A lumberjack doesn't fell a new species of tree without first understanding how it splits, where the knot is, which way it falls. He was living among those things now, was going to live among them for who knew how long. And the more he knew, the more his daughter lived. Fear we understand is smaller than fear we imagine. He'd told Marina that, and it applied to him too. There was one of them stuck down there in the creek for days. Vance had seen it going for water, tangled between 2 rocks on the bank, leg wedged, unable to get out, repeating the same useless heave like the one in the blackberry bush on the trail. They got stuck with idiotic ease because they had no patience or intelligence to solve a problem, only stupid, stubborn force in one direction. Vance went down, it in hand, and did what he'd never had the stomach to do before, stopped about 15 feet away and watched, without killing, noting everything in the cold part of his head. Decomposition. The creek dead was worse than days ago. The facial skin had sunk, pulled against bone, lips receding from teeth in a grimace that wasn't rage, just flesh drying. The eyes, before clouded, were now deep, milky, almost dry in their sockets. Where the clothes tore, the arm flesh was greenish, swollen in one spot, shriveled in another, and the smell had changed again. Not the sweet sour of the first day of Dave. It was an older smell, earthier, of something dead a long time, of woods in decay. They wore down. As everything wears down, the mountain cold seemed to slow the thing, but didn't stop it. Vance did the math. If they decomposed like this, week after week, then time worked on his side. He just had to outlast them. How long did a body like that hold up walking before a joint locked for good, before muscle rotted and let go of bone? He didn't know, but he'd find out, living. And the answer would be one of the most important things in the new world. He tested the sound, struck the axe handle against a rock sharp. The thing stopped its heave, turned its head in the exact direction of the strike, on target, even with eyes nearly blind. The hearing aimed, always the hearing. He tested movement and its absence, stood still, totally still, silent, in the thing's line of sight, 5 feet away. It lost interest in seconds, went back to trying to free itself from the rocks, forgetting him. Still and silent, he was a rock. Just move a foot, snap a leaf, and the head turned again. Movement and sound, that's all they had. Take away the sound and the movement, and the man disappeared from their world. And then he tested the last thing, the one that scared him most, and did it on purpose because he had to know the blood. He'd cut his thumb slightly on the file days before, and the scab was still there. He picked it off, squeezed until a thick drop came, and let it fall on a rock, and stepped back, still and silent, far away. The thing went crazy. Not by sight, not by sound, Vance was motionless and mute. It was the smell. The dead man's head lifted. The sunken nostrils flared, and it restarted its heave against the rocks with new hunger, doubled, turning its face toward the exact spot of the blood drop on the rock, far from him, far from any movement. Smell, strong smell for blood, stronger than for whole living flesh. A drop on a rock 5 feet away on a half-rotten body, and the thing went insane. Vance went back up with the lesson branded in iron. While they see badly and hear well, blood was worse than sound. An open wound in the woods near them was a siren he couldn't turn off. Marina would have to learn that. Any cut, no matter how small, covered immediately, clean, without letting it drip. Not just for the infection that killed slow, for the smell that killed fast. He didn't go back to kill the creek dead. It was stuck, couldn't reach anyone, and wasting blows and noise on it was a luxury. He left it there, rotting between the rocks, turning, slowly, part of the woods again, which was where everything went in the end. At night, Vance did 2 things. First, he taught Marina the lesson of blood, without scaring more than necessary. In the calm way he taught everything, showed his own cut thumb, explained the smell, made her repeat. Cut covered immediately, never let it drip. Blood calls them from far away. The girl repeated, serious, and stored it, her way, the way she never forgot anything. Second, by the glow of the embers, with the shutters closed so light wouldn't leak, he roughed out more of the cedar owl. The first wing was nearly done now. The chips fell on the plank floor with that sweet, clean smell, the exact opposite of the creek smell. And Vance noticed he was doing this with more calm, more care, and understood why. The owl was the proof that still existed in the middle of everything, a thing he could do slowly, completely, beautifully, without rush and without fear. A piece of before, a piece of the old man teaching the boy to carve wooden animals in that same house on an afternoon 40 years ago that smelled exactly like this one, of cedar and smoke. Marina slept, the chicken slept. The house was sealed on the cinnamon bar, the can line armed at the funnel, the water with a charcoal mark. Day 7 ended like that, and it was a good day, the way days could be good now. Nobody died, nobody got sick, nobody appeared on the trail. And he learned 3 things that would keep his daughter alive. In the new world, that was a good day. Vance learned to call it good and to be grateful for it, because the alternative was going crazy. And he didn't have the right to go crazy. There was a girl sleeping beside him, and a half-done owl, and a promise made in a triage room. To go on was the only thing. To go on was everything. The storm hit on day 9 and almost killed them without needing a single dead one. It came from the south, the whole afternoon, announcing sky closing gray over the mountain, wind turning to a cold blaze, smell of rain still far but coming. Vance knew that sky. It was the sky of someone who was going to spend the night awake, and not because of zombies, because of the roof. The old man's house was good, but the cedar shake roof had gaps Vance hadn't fixed yet. Busy as he'd been sealing doors, stringing lines, treating water, fetching food. He'd been putting it off. A roof you fix when it stops raining, and there was always something more urgent. Now the urgency had become the roof, because a mountain storm with a leaky house soaks everything. Food, fire, blankets, people, and people soaked in July cold, without dry clothes, without warming properly, caught what Mrs. Inez would later call pneumonia. And pneumonia without a doctor in that world was a death sentence, just like a bite, only slower. "I'm going up to fix it before it hits," Vance said, already tying the rope around his waist. "You stay down. When I ask for a shake, you pass it up the ladder. When I ask for nails, you pass the nails, counted one at a time, because nails on a wet roof are easy to lose, and we don't have nails to spare in the world." He went up with the wind already strong, worked fast, the way you work against time, fitting new shakes into gaps, nailing, wedging, reading the water's path to cover first the spots that poured on the bed and the stove. Marina passed things up the ladder, counted the nails in a low voice, serious as a construction helper, and it was going well, and he'd finish before the rain. And right then, when it was going well, when he relaxed a thread, when the fatigue of 8 days sleeping in pieces weighed on his hand, he slipped. The hammer slid on the shake, wet with dew. His hand went with it, and the sharp corner of a cut shake, sharp as he himself had sharpened it, opened the palm of his left hand from side to side, a deep, clean cut, the kind that doesn't hurt in the first second and then hurts for every second that remains. The blood came fast thick, dark in the gray light, running down the shake, dripping from the eave. And the first thing Vance thought, before the pain, before everything, was yesterday's lesson. The smell. Blood calls them from far away, and the roof was dripping his blood into the yard, into the woods, and the wind carried the smell downhill. "Rag!" he shouted to Marina, controlling his voice to not scare more than necessary, but fast. "The clean rag on the table. Throw it up here. Quick, sweetheart." The girl didn't ask anything, climbed a half the ladder, threw the rag, accurate. Vance pressed the palm hard, wrapped it, pressed harder, and came down from the roof with one hand, leaving the rest of the gap for later, because dripping blood was more dangerous now than a leak. Below, with the rain starting to hit, he did what he knew, what he'd learned alone from the Benedettis' kit, before there was a Mrs. Inez to teach. Wash the cut with boiled water and soap, first and most important, because dirt kills more than a knife. Press the edges. The cut was deep but clean, from a sharp corner, not torn. Those closed better. He didn't know how to sew yet, not right, not with one hand and shaking, so he did what he could. Pressed the edges together and closed with strips of adhesive tape, crossed, tight, the way you splint, and bandages over that, and raised his hand above his heart to slow the flow, sitting on the bench with Marina holding the bandage in place with her small, cold hands. "Will it get infected?" she asked quietly, eyes big on her father's hand. "It might." Vance didn't lie. "That's why I washed it well. That's why I'm going to look at it every day, morning and night. And you're going to look with me, and you're going to learn what to watch for." He breathed. "If it gets red around and spreads, if it gets hot, if a red line appears climbing up the arm, from the cut to the elbow, if it smells bad, any of those, we treat hard with the Italian's medicine right away without waiting." He looked at his daughter. "A cut like this, in a world without doctors, kills a man as sure as a zombie. More people are going to die from stupid cuts and bad teeth and dirty water from now on than from bites. Remember that. The danger doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it's a wet shake and a tired man who relaxed." He was talking to her, but he was talking to himself, and they both knew. His own fear, his own fatigue, his own mistake. That he understood that Stormy Night was an enemy as dangerous as the others, and more treacherous because it didn't come down the trail where the can line warned. It came from inside on the 8th day without proper sleep. At the moment the hand relaxes because things were going well. He was going to have to learn to rest, to take turns, to not do everything alone until he collapsed, or the fatigue would kill his daughter through him. Sooner or later, the rain fell all night, heavy, and the half-fixed roof held the essentials. It dripped in one corner, in a bucket, tap, tap, tap. But the bed was dry and the fire was lit, and that, on that night, was victory. And somewhere in the night, with his hand throbbing inside the bandage and the rain drumming on the new shake, a small, good thing happened that Vance stored for the rest of his life in the reserve of good mornings. Marina, who couldn't sleep with the rain noise and the image of her father's open hand, came from her grandfather's bed to the bench where he kept vigil, leaned against him, and the two stayed there, listening to the rain. And the girl, after a while, in a small voice, asked, "Dad, tell me something good from before." "One I don't remember." And Vance, who wasn't a man of many words, who spoke more by gesture and work than by word, made the effort and told. He told of when she was born in the rain on a stormy night just like that one, and the car got stuck on the Pine Brook Road, and he had to carry Teresa in labor on his back for almost a kilometer of mud to the clinic. The same clinic, he didn't say that, kept it to himself. And how Teresa, even in the middle of pain, laughed at him slipping in the mud, laughed and cursed and laughed. And how when Marina was born, red and angry and screaming loud, the doctor said, "This one came with lungs that want to be heard." And Teresa, exhausted, looked at the girl and said, "Then let her be heard, no matter what." "Mom said that?" Marina whispered. "Said it." Vance ran his good hand through his daughter's hair, and his voice was hoarse again. But it was a different hoarseness from grief. It was grief mixed with something warm that hurt good. "You came screaming into the world, sweetheart, lungs that want to be heard." He smiled in the dark. "Now we have to live quiet, on tiptoe, and that must be the hardest thing in the world for you, huh? Just you." And Marina laughed, quietly, on tiptoe, the new world's way. But she laughed, and it was such a good sound in the middle of the storm that Vance closed his eyes to store it whole. They fell asleep on the bench, leaning together, with the rain falling, the father's wounded hand throbbing slowly, the half-done cedar owl in the vest pocket, and for a few hours, just a few, but they were worth it, the old man's house on the mountain was, against everything, against the whole rotting world below, a place where a father and a daughter were simply alive and dry and together and almost at peace. Day 11. Vance found the footprint that wasn't his. He was going down to the creek for water. At the curve where the trail crossed a stretch of soft mud, and there, in the mud, a boot print, sneaker sole, large size, fresh impression, from someone who stepped firm, with the weight of a living person, not the dragging foot of the dead. And it wasn't his print. Vance knew his own print like he knew his own hand. He crouched over the print for a long time. His heart, no, not his heart. He wasn't going to think about heart racing. That was luxury for someone with time to feel beautiful fear. What he felt was his neck cooling and his hand closing on the axe, calculating. The print pointed uphill toward the house. Someone had come up the trail, stopped there, and continued. When the mud was starting to dry at the edges, a few hours, maybe from the night before, he went up fast and silent. The house was sealed, bar in place, can line intact. Nobody had passed through the funnel. He knocked 3, paused 2, said his daughter's name. Marina opened, whole, all clear. Someone's been here, he said low, locking the door. Print on the lower trail, not mine. Someone came up and went back, or came up into circling. He dropped the jug. From now on, everything changes. Zombie, we understand. People know. People think, lie, plan, and hungry people do what zombies don't. Wait for you to lower your guard. It could be good people. It could. Vance looked through the shutter crack, scanning the woods, and I pray it is. But I'm not betting your life on what I pray. We treat everyone as danger until proven otherwise. It's not malice. It's math. They appeared the next day, and they didn't come hidden. They came calling. Hello in the house, a man's voice from the trail mouth on the other side of the can line. Hello in the house. There are good people here. We don't want trouble. Vance put Marina behind the overturned table, machete in her hand, away from the door, and went to the window to look. There were 3, a man about 30, thin, unshaven, hands up showing he had no visible weapon. Behind him, an older woman, gray-haired, with one arm in an improvised sling, and a boy, younger than Marina, maybe 8, clinging to the woman's skirt, looking like he hadn't slept right in a long time. It wasn't a robbery gang. A robbery gang doesn't bring an injured old woman and an 8-year-old child to the front. Vance read the scene. Defeated people, more afraid of him than he of them, coming to ask. But he also read the cold possibility that the child and the old woman were bait, and that there were more people in the woods, and his woods part didn't relax its grip. Stay there, Vance shouted from the window, without showing his full body. There's wire on the ground in front of you, 2 lines. Don't cross. Stay there and talk. The man looked down, found the can line, and something on his face Vance saw even from far away was almost admiration. Who recognizes a well-made trap as someone who's needed one. My name's Renan, the man said. This is Mrs. Inez, and the boy is Pedro, her nephew. We were in a group down there near the Pine Brook gym, about 20. His voice failed. There's no more group. They raided. It wasn't zombies. It was people. Armed people, organized, taking everything that's food in the area by force. We ran. Walked 3 days in the woods. Mrs. Inez broke her arm in a fall. The boy hasn't eaten right in 2 days. He lowered his hands slowly, tired. We saw your smoke from far off early morning. I came up yesterday to see if it was worth the risk and didn't have the nerve to come at night. Today, I came back with them. A silence. We don't want to take anything of yours. We want to trade work for food and a roof for one night. Mrs. Inez is a nurse, worth gold, a nurse in this world. Whatever you need sewn, splinted, she does. Vance stayed silent, weighed everything. A nurse was worth gold. That was naked truth. And he thought of Teresa, the bite on her arm, how someone who knew things might have. No might. It was no use, might. Teresa was dead, and no nurse would bring her back. But Marina wasn't, and Marina could cut herself, could catch fever, and he didn't know how to sew people, only how to sew tarp. A nurse in the area, even 3 trails away, was insurance against the small cut that kills. But 3 more mouths ate his supply in half the time. And armed people taking food by force down there was the worst news of the day, worse than the 3 on the trail. It was a clock ticking against him, and he thanked in a crooked way that this Renan had told. "I have a daughter here," Vance said, and left the sentence hanging on purpose to see what the man did with it. Renan understood right away, put his hand on his nephew's shoulder, pulled him forward half a step, offering his own weakness as guarantee. "I have this one here," he said. "We're the same then. 2 men with children to care for in a world that doesn't want children alive." He looked Vance in the eyes and didn't look away. "I won't do to your daughter what I'd kill anyone who did to this boy. You have my word. I know a word means nothing today, but it's what I have." Vance looked at that for a time that seemed long to both sides of the wire, and then did something that would later save and nearly destroy everything he trusted. Not completely. He trusted the way you trust a branch on a climb, putting only part of the weight, ready to pull back. "You stay in the old shed below the house today," he said, pointing to a smaller, separate structure in the corner of the yard. "Not in the house. The house is mine and my daughter's. You eat what I give, say thanks, and that's it. No asking for more. Mrs. Inez looks at my girl's throat, which has been inflamed, and teaches me what she knows about wound care. And tomorrow we talk about what to do about this armed people business down there." He hardened his voice. "But one thing I'll say now, and say once, for everyone to hear the first lie I catch, the first hand where it shouldn't be, and I don't give a second chance. There's no more police station, no more jail, no more second chance in the world. I'm all of that now. Understood?" "Understood," Renan said. And Mrs. Inez, who hadn't spoken until then, raised her gray head and said with a voice hoarse from fatigue but firm as bone, "God pay you the roof, son, and sorry for the weight we bring." Her eyes found Marina, who had appeared in the door crack uninvited, curious, and the old nurse's face opened in tender fatigue. "Come here, girl. Let me see that throat, and lose the fear, because an old woman with a broken arm doesn't bite." Marina looked at her father. Vance, after a moment, nodded, and for the first time in 11 days, other human voices entered the yard of the old man's house. And Vance, opening the can line to let them pass through the funnel, knew with the cold certainty of someone who reads the sky before rain that he had just made the most dangerous decision since he came down the mountain. Good or bad, only time, which marks everything on the body and in the count, would tell. Mrs. Inez looked at Marina's throat in the window light and made a face Vance didn't like. Bad tonsillitis. She palpated the girl's neck with her good hand, slowly. "Pus on the tonsils, see? These white spots. Hurts to swallow, right, my flower?" Marina nodded. "This, untreated, in a weakened body, gets ugly, can turn to abscess, can bring fever." The old woman turned to Vance. "Did you bring antibiotics from somewhere? That pile of things I saw you unloading." Vance went to get the Benedetti's jar of amoxicillin. Mrs. Inez took it, read the peeled label, checked the dosage with the frown of someone who'd done this for 40 years. Expired. She shrugged with a good shoulder. Expired is the least of it. Loses strength with time. Doesn't become poison. I've given worse things to people in worse shape. She separated the pills with her fingernail. She takes it like this. So many per day, so many days, and doesn't stop in the middle just because she feels better. Hear me, girl? Antibiotic you stop in the middle is worse than not taking. It teaches the bacteria to take a hit and not die. Finish it all. She looked at Vance. This is the first lesson. Want to learn to care for her. Pay attention to this one because it's the one that kills most people by stupidity. Medicine gets finished always, even when cured. It was the first of many lessons. In those days, day 12, 13, 14, Vance's body already counting time on its own while her arm healed in the splint he'd made himself, carved and tied the way he carved wedges. Mrs. Inez taught the lumberjack what she knew, and he, who learned fast with his hands, learned how to clean a wound with boiled water and soap before anything, because dirt kills more than a knife. How to close a cut. Separate stitches, not continuous. So if the one pops, it doesn't open everything, not on the side, never over the cut. How to recognize infection starting, spreading redness, heat, a red line climbing the vein, smell. How to measure a fever without a thermometer, by hand on the neck and chest, comparing. Vance sewed a piece of leather again and again at night, practicing the stitch, the same hands that closed trunks, learning delicacy. And Mrs. Inez corrected, less force, son. It's not a wedge you're hammering, it's a person. He stored each lesson in the most protected part of his head because he knew with the coldness of someone doing math that one day one of those lessons would be the difference between Marina living or not, and he didn't have the right to forget any. Renan was a worker, and that in a man Vance respected faster than any pretty word. By the second day, the guy had already fixed the roof gap Vance hadn't had time to reach. Up on the cedar shakes with the skill of someone who'd done this before, without anyone asking. He chopped firewood, badly, the way someone who'd never held a real axe does, but he chopped, and took corrections with good humor when Vance corrected the swing. You're swinging with your arm, swing with your hip. Let the weight of the iron do the work or you'll burn out in an hour. He fetched water. He kept watch at night, rotating, and you could trust his watch, which was the hardest test to pass. And Pedro, the 8-year-old nephew, changed the house in a way Vance didn't expect. Marina, who'd been old beyond her 11 years, became a kid again near the smaller boy. She taught him to walk on the edge of his foot, showed him the chickens, introduced Teresa Chicken with a seriousness that cut the heart. The two invented a silent game of guessing the wood sounds. That was a robin. No, it was a crow. Everything whispered, because even their play was born quiet. Child of that world, Vance, cleaning a wound or filing a chain, watched them from the side and felt something warm and painful at the same time, because it was good to see his daughter laugh, and it was terrible to think that was one more thing he could lose. At night, Mrs. Inez told stories to the kids in a thin voice, stories from before, of church suppers, of harvests, of a world with electricity and ice cream and school, and the two listened open-mouthed, like someone hearing fairy tales, because for them it already was a fairy tale, a place where children went to school and came back alive was as fantastic as a dragon. But Renan's news kept gnawing at Vance inside. On the 5th day of living together, day 15 of the new world, the two men went down together, leaving the children with Mrs. Inez in the house locked to do what Vance called reading the land, understanding from afar who the armed men were without getting close, without being seen. Vance taught Renan to move in the woods the way he'd taught Marina, and the two went tree to tree along the high edge of the hillside to a point where you could see the valley and the gas station road at the Pine Brook exit to the highway, and they saw the gas station had become a fort, trucks sideways making a wall, people armed for real, shotgun, rifle, not axe, and machete on patrol, an improvised flag, a sheet with a painted symbol flapping on a pole, and movement, pickups leaving loaded empty and returning full, stacks of supplies being unloaded, people entering, some by force, you could see, with hands tied. It wasn't a survivor group. It was a gang that had understood before everyone that at the end of the world, whoever controls food and water controls people, and was gathering both and people along with them. They called the guy Colonel, Renan whispered, lying on the leaves beside Vance. He's not colonel of anything. He was a bank security guard, had the guns and the patter. Gathered a bunch. His rule is simple. You hand over what you have and work for him, or your resources. And resources, the way they talk about it, is what they feed the zombies at the fence to keep the creatures occupied away from the station. His voice got sick. I saw. That's why we ran. They were going to put Mrs. Inez on the fence because an old woman with a broken arm doesn't produce. Vance stared at the fort for a long time, recording everything, guard points, patrol schedules, where their water came from, how many there were. About 30 armed, he estimated. Maybe more. He measured that the way he measured a hillside before opening a trail, looking for the weak point, and the conclusion was cold and clear. There was no weak point two men with axes could attack. That wasn't fought. That was avoided. Do they know about my house? He asked. Not that I know of. You're far, high, out of reach. But the colonel sends people to scout the mountain for hidden people and hidden food. Renan swallowed. It's a matter of time, Vance. Sooner or later, someone comes up your trail. And when they do, it won't be to ask for a roof. It'll be to take it. Vance backed away from the edge, slowly, without making a leaf snap, pulling Renan by the arm. They went back in silence, each with his own fear. And for the first time since locking the door on the cinnamon bar, Vance understood that the old man's house, with all its single entry mouth and its free cliff and its can line, had been designed to stop slow, stupid things. Things that trip on wire and rattle the can and fall on the slope. It hadn't been designed to stop men. Men with rifles, with plans, with patience, and with hunger for everything he had killed. The food, the water, the daughter. That night, he didn't work on the owl. He sat by the stove with his father's axe across his knees, looking at the embers, and began, in his head, to draw a new defense, not against the dead, against the living. Before spending 2 days preparing the trail to kill men, Vance had one more day of almost peace, and it was good to have had, because it was the last. Day 16. The morning dawned clear, without that heavy fog, the sun entering at an angle through the pines and hitting the dirt yard. Mrs. Inez, with her arm mostly out of the sling now, had taken over the kitchen like someone taking a throne and made, from the few things they had, food that fooled the soul, a thin bean soup with pine nuts and a handful of cornmeal, but seasoned with an herb she found at the back of the yard, a wild oregano that had sprouted on its own among the rocks, and that gave the soup a smell of a kitchen from before, of Sunday, of a grandmother's house. The kids ate from bowls in their hands, sitting on the threshold, and Pedro, for the first time since arriving, asked for seconds. He asked for seconds, Mrs. Inez told Vance quietly, and her voice had a pride that didn't fit the size of the thing. A grieving boy who asked for seconds is a boy who decided to stay. I was worried about that one. A kid who doesn't eat is a kid who's leaving inside. This one came back. Renan heard on the roof, where he finished a repair Vance had started a lifetime ago, said nothing. But Vance saw the man stop his hammer an instant, look at his nephew eating on the threshold beside Marina, and close his eyes for a second, like someone thanking someone who's no longer there. Renan carried his own pocket of stones, Vance knew. He'd never said what happened to Pedro's parents, and Vance never asked, because he'd already learned which questions you don't ask. But you could read it in the man's back, in the way he cared for the boy, with a care too big for an uncle, the size of someone who took on a guilt that might not have been his. That afternoon, the two men worked side by side, sharpening tools, and Vance, without planning, ended up teaching Renan to properly put an edge on an axe. The angle of the file, the pulling stroke, always the same direction. Don't go and come back sawing, because you round the edge instead of sharpening. Renan learned well with his hands. He was a carpenter by trade before all that, made custom furniture in a shop in Oak Ridge, and so he had skill with wood and tools. And the two discovered, sharpening axes on that sunny afternoon, that they spoke the same language, the language of people who work with their hands and respect the material. We'd have gotten along in the old world, Renan said, testing the axe edge on his arm hair. Lumberjack and carpenter, you failed. I made tables. We're getting along in this one, Vance said. Which is harder? Renan laughed, that short, tired laugh of his, and then, serious, looking at the valley below where, far off, was the colonel's fort. They're coming, right, sooner or later. They're coming, and we can't beat 30 armed guys head on. Not head on. Vance also looked at the valley. But the mountain is mine. Every tree on this hill, every rock. I'm not going to fight them head on. I'm going to make the mountain fight for me. He didn't explain more, because the plan was still taking shape in his head. Cold, terrible, and he didn't want to say out loud, in front of a sunny afternoon and kids eating soup, the thing he was going to have to do. For now, we enjoy the sun. Tomorrow we start working hard. Today, no. Today, we let the kids soak up some sun. There are days you need to store whole, Renan, to get through the ones coming. The can line went off at 3 in the morning. Vance was keeping watch, rotating with Renan now, half the night each. And that, having someone to rotate with, was a luxury he hadn't known how much he needed until he had it. He heard the dry rattle from the funnel and was on his feet before thinking, axe in hand, without lighting any light. He nudged Renan, who slept nearby, a finger to his lips. The other woke, startled, but silent. Already learned. The two went to the window, peeked through the shutter crack. Just one. Vance counted the seconds of the rattle, the position, the movement in the funnel's darkness. One dead one, alone, had tripped on the lower line and tangled in the wire. And now it thrashed, and each thrash rattled more cans, in a racket that, if it lasted, would call every dead one within kilometers, and worse, would rob 2 kids and a sick old woman of sleep they needed from him. One only, Vance whispered. I'll handle it. You stay at the door, machete in hand, watching the funnel in case more come behind. Don't leave. Only warn if company comes. He went out with the bar raised in silence, closed behind him, and went to the funnel on the edge of his foot in near total darkness, guiding himself by the sound of the can and the map of the trail he had on the soles of his feet. The dead one was there, tangled in the wire to the waist, a figure thrashing, and its smell came first, earthy, old, of weeks. One of the older ones, the ones already wearing down. Vance had no rush and no waste. Waited for the figure to turn the right way, measured in the dark by the darker shape that was the head, and struck once sideways, with force and economy at the point the structure gives. The can gave one last rattle and went silent. The figure went limp on the wire. Silence. Only the creek below and the wind and the heartbeat. No, he wasn't going to. Only Vance's own breathing coming down slow. He untangled the dead one from the wire carefully so as not to break the line, which was work to redo, and dragged the body out of the funnel, downhill far, so the smell wouldn't mark the path and draw others to the exact point of defense. Retensioned the wire, repositioned the cans, system rearmed, and went back. All that in silence, in the dark, in a few minutes, without waking anyone. And when he entered the house again and lowered the cinnamon bar, Renan at the door looked at him with a face that took Vance time to understand, and that was, he realized, a face of near scared respect. "You did that like someone stepping out to turn off a light," Renan whispered. Without anything, without shaking, without moving too much. Shaking comes after. Vance leaned the axe against the wall. In the moment, the hand doesn't shake, otherwise you miss. And missing kills. He sat again at the watchpost, and after a while, quieter, more to himself than to the other. "I wasn't born knowing how to do this, Renan. 16 days ago, I threw up the first time I needed to. Today, I turn off the light, like you said." He looked at his own hands in the dark. "That should scare me more than it does, and that's what truly scares me. How much we become what we need to become, and how easy it gets. Pray you never find it easy, Renan. The day it gets easy for you, remind me of who you were before, and I'll remind you of who I was. Deal. We watch out for that in each other, the part of us that's still worth something." Renan was silent a while, in the dark. "Deal," he said finally. And it was the last real conversation the two had, because 2 days later, Renan would die on a trail protecting a child, without letting a Ben Meh get down to warn. And Vance would carry, along with all the others, the stone of not having had time to remind Renan, not even once, of who he was before, and of not having heard Renan remind him. But that was 2 days away. On that dawn still, they were just 2 tired men watching over the sleep of 3 people and 3 chickens in a house sealed on the bar on top of a mountain, with the part of them still worth something, guarded by each other, alive for one more night. Vance spent 2 days preparing the trail to kill men, and every hour of it weighed on his soul like felling a tree never had. The idea was old as the craft, the tree that falls where you want. A good lumberjack doesn't fell a tree to fall any which way. He decides, before the first cut, the exact inch of ground where the trunk will hit, and makes the tree obey by the notch, by the mouth, by the wood hinge he leaves on purpose. Vance had done that 300 times for money. Now he was going to do it once for blood. He chose a big pine on the high edge of the funnel, the narrows of the trail where the can line already was, the only point someone needed to pass to reach the house. He cut the notch mouth facing down toward the narrows, carefully, so the tree, if released, would crash down across whoever was climbing there. But he didn't fell it, left the thick hinge intact, holding the trunk upright and tied to the top a pulling rope that ran hidden through the woods to the house window. A quick cut on the weakened hinge, a pull on the rope at the right moment, and 2 tons of pine came down on the funnel. "You're going to drop a tree on people," Renan said, holding the rope while Vance sawed the hinge at the exact point. "I am." Vance didn't stop the saw. "If they come up to kill my daughter, I am." He shut off, checked the cut with his finger, measured the fall with his eyes again. "And if you don't have the stomach for that, tell me now, because I won't count on you at the moment, and I don't need you getting in the way. No shame at all. Everyone endures what they endure." Renan was quiet a time. Then, "I endure. For Pedro, I endure anything." His voice was steady, but his hand on the rope trembled, and Vance respected both. He did more. Dug at night in the soft ground right after the funnel, a shallow trench, and stuck in it stakes of bamboo cut at an angle, sharpened the way he sharpened wedges, pointed at whoever was climbing, and covered with leaves, not to kill, to wound, to slow, to make scream, because a man who falls on a stake screams, and a scream breaks organized attacks and draws the dead from the area, and the dead can't tell gang from family. Vance had understood one thing up on the hillside, looking at the colonel's fort. He couldn't beat 30 armed men by force, but maybe he could make the woods and the dead fight on his side. The woods was his army. It always had been. He rehearsed with everyone where each one stood. Marina and Pedro in the back bedroom against the rock, behind the bed flipped on its side as a shield with clear orders. "Don't leave for anything. Even if you hear Dad scream, even if you hear shots. And if the house falls, go out the back window and disappear down the north trail marked in orange, and don't come back." Mrs. Inez with them, machete in hand, and the only thing resembling a firearm they had, the old man's single-shot shotgun, which Vance found in the attic, with 5 hunting shells that might not even fire. She didn't know how to shoot. Vance taught the basics in 10 minutes. Rest against the shoulder, aim for the body, pull only if they enter the bedroom, only as a last resort. Aim for the belly of whoever comes in, because bellies are big and you won't miss, and bellies stop men. They came on day 18 at dawn, and they came right. 4 men, not the 30. 4. A search patrol from the colonel sweeping the mountain, and that, Vance understood in the first glance through the crack, was the worst and best news. Worse because if those 4 sent word back, the 30 would come. Best because 4 maybe could be stopped, and stopped with none going back to tell was the only possible victory. The idea froze Vance inside, because it was an idea of killing everyone, leaving no witness, and that was an idea of the kind of man he hadn't been 18 days before. They came up confident, talking loud. Too confident, armed people who'd gotten used to nobody fighting back. 2 in front with rifles, 1 in the middle, 1 in back. Vance, lying in the brush above the funnel with the tree rope in hand and the axe beside him, waited. The woods part inside him was cold and still, the way it was before a difficult cut. Renan was on the other side of the narrows, crouched behind a rock with the machete and 3 big stones stacked. The first man tripped on the can line. The rattle cut the morning. The 4 stopped, raised their weapons, turned to both sides, and that was exactly what Vance wanted, because while they tried to understand the sound, all 4 crowded into the funnel's narrows, standing together on the exact inch of ground where the tree would hit. Vance cut the hinge with 2 clean axe blows and pulled the rope with his whole body. The pine spoke. Now yes, the long groan of tearing fiber, the right sound, the sound of a tree that falls where it was told, and came down on the funnel in a crash that shook the ground. 2 of the men had no time for anything. The trunk hit across, and the whole crowd swallowed the narrows. And what had been 2 men standing became silence under 2 tons of wood and branch. It wasn't clean. It wasn't pretty. Vance never forgot the sound, which wasn't the sound of the tree. It was the other one. The 3rd man was thrown back by the crown, fell, got up cursing, unharmed, and fired his rifle blend into the woods upward in panic, and the bullet passed close enough to Vance to rip bark from the tree beside his head. Vance rolled, got up, and one went. He didn't run to attack head on. A man with a rifle beats a man with an axe at 10 paces every time. He came from the side, crouching, using the fallen crown as cover, the way you bypass an obstacle in the woods. And when the guy swung the rifle looking for a target, Vance was already inside the range, too close for a long gun to work, and struck, not the head, the arm, the forearm holding the rifle with the axe edge, and the blow did what a lumberjack's blow does, and the rifle fell with the hand still on the trigger. The man screamed. Vance didn't stop to listen to the scream. The second blow finished it, and he hated his own hand for how well it knew how to do that. The 4th man, the one in back, the one the tree didn't catch, he was the problem. He'd fallen back, had a view of everything, and was running down the trail to warn, to bring the 30. "Renan, the one in back, don't let him get down," Vance shouted, and dropped everything and went after. But the man had 20 paces lead and rested legs, and he was going to reach the curve and disappear. Renan threw himself. He came from behind the rock with the 3 big stones and threw the first, which caught the man in the back and made him stumble but not fall, and the second, which missed and then did the thing Vance didn't order and didn't expect, ran down the trail after the guy, unarmed, just the machete, shouting, throwing himself between the man and the curve, between the man and the 30. The 2 rolled down the trail, tangled. Vance came running, axe in hand, but the trail made a curve and a tree blocked it, and when he rounded the curve, the 2 were on the ground, and there was blood, lots of blood, and he didn't know at first whose it was. It was both. The colonel's man was dead, Renan's machete buried under his chin, Renan's hand still on the handle, and Renan was lying on his back beside him, his free hand pressing his belly, and between his fingers came what shouldn't come, because the guy in the fall had managed to drive a hunting knife into Renan before dying. "I got him," Renan said. The voice was already from far away. "Didn't let him get down. See? Didn't let him warn." Don't talk. Let me see." Vance opened the man's hand from his belly, and what he saw made the woods part inside him, the cold part that measured everything, deliver the verdict the heart didn't want. That wouldn't close. That was deep, in the wrong place, in the no doctor, no hospital, no more anything in the world category. Not even Mrs. Inez with both good hands would close that. Renan, look at me. Pedro. Renan grabbed Vance's vest with his bloodied hand. "You raise Pedro, like you raise yours. Promise me, lumberjack, promise me the way you promise someone, because I saw in your face that you already made a promise like that to someone." And Vance, kneeling on the trail, for the second time in 18 days with his hand on the wound of someone who was going to die protecting a child, made the second promise. "I promise I'll raise Pedro. He's mine now. I swear by my father." Renan smiled, or tried. He looked up at the woods, at the morning light entering through the pines, like someone noticing a beautiful thing for the last time, and said quietly, without any drama, in the simplest way in the world, "It's beautiful up here, isn't it?" and went. Vance stayed kneeling a time. 4 men dead on his trail in a single morning. 3 he killed with his own hands in his tree, living men who breathed, who might have had mothers somewhere, and a friend of 6 days who died paying the bill of Vance's choice to trust. There was no ready phrase for that. There was nothing round and profound to think. There was only the weight and the blood cooling and the beautiful light Renan noticed at the end. And down there, far off, the sound of the surrounded dead starting to come, drawn by the shot, by the scream, by the tree's crash. The army Vance had summoned without being able to dismiss. He had to clear the trail, hide the bodies before the dead arrived, and feasted and stayed circling. Take the rifles and ammo that were now his, and get back to the house before his daughter came down looking. He stood. His hands were steady again. The lumberjack body, knowing that grief you feel after, that in the moment of work, the hand doesn't shake. He took Renan by the arms, carefully, respectfully, and began the climb. The owl that night he didn't touch, but he gained a new reason to finish it someday. Now there were 2 children waiting for the world to have whole things again. The dead came after the noise, as Vance knew they would. It wasn't a horde, it was a handful, 7, 8, the ones close enough on the mountain to hear the tree crash and the shot and the scream. They came up the trail during that afternoon in line, in their dragging step, and they tripped one by one in what Vance had left for them. The fallen tree across the funnel, the staked trench, the steep slope that dead legs don't conquer. It was almost easy. It was the easy part of the hardest day. Vance waited for them at the top of the funnel, in the good spot, where he was standing and stable, and they arrived below, off balance, climbing the fallen trunk with that clumsiness, one at a time. When the head appeared at the edge of the trunk, he struck from above, with the weight of the axe and gravity in his favor, and he didn't even need much force. Geometry, leverage. The dead did half the work climbing to the blade. 8 heads, 8 sounds he no longer vomited from, and that not vomiting anymore was a thing he noticed with a shudder of sadness, because measuring how much you harden is measuring how much you've lost. Mrs. Inez watched from the window, said nothing about the dead in the funnel, said quietly, when he came up, wiping the blade on a rag, "Renan?" Vance just shook his head once. The old woman closed her eyes, didn't cry right away. People her age had buried too many to waste tears in front of the children. She put her good hand on her chest, prayed something in silence, and when she opened her eyes, they were wet but steady. "He got Pedro out of that Colonel hell," she said. "Carried that boy 3 days in the woods. He wasn't even his father. He was his uncle." Her voice shook once, just once. "He died doing the only thing that matters. There's worse dying. There's much worse dying. I've seen it." She looked at Vance. "How are you going to tell the boy the truth?" Vance put down the axe. "That his uncle died protecting everyone, that he was brave, that he didn't let a bad man get down to bring more bad men." He swallowed. "I don't lie to kids about death and danger. I learned from Marina. Lying about that takes away their weapons." They buried Renan up top, in a place with a view of the pines, because he'd said it was beautiful up here, and Vance figured a man who notices beauty in the last second of life deserved to stay where the beauty was. Dug the grave deep with the Benedetti's shovel. Deep the right way, so animals don't dig. Deep the right way, so that if one day Renan turned, because Vance didn't know if someone who dies without a bite turns, and he wasn't going to risk the doubt with children around, he wouldn't get out. But Renan didn't turn. he stayed, and that gave Vance a cold, precious piece of information he stored. Someone who dies without being bitten, without the fluid entering, stays. It's not the air, it's not the water, it's only the bite, it's only the blood in the wound. Everything else is rumor. Pedro cried all night, quietly the way that world taught children to cry. Marina slept hugging him, and Vance, from the bedroom door, looked at the two and felt the new weight of the second promise settle on his shoulders alongside the first. Now there were two. The food count he redid on the charcoal board that night, and the count laughed at his face. One more mouth, fewer days, and the dead colonel's rifles, 3 good guns, and a box of ammunition weren't edible. Day 20, the clock of time marked on everyone's body now. Vance had lost weight. The belt on a new house, the long beard, the deep eye circles, the someone sleeping in pieces keeping watch. Marina was taller and thinner, her face losing the roundness of childhood, taking on her mother's angles and a quietness in her eyes that wasn't 11 years old. Pedro, a little, grieving, and Mrs. Inez fought with him softly to eat. Your uncle didn't run 3 days in the woods for you to waste away. Eat, boy. The old woman's arm had healed well in Vance's splint. She moved her fingers, already took off the sling sometimes, but the cold, bitter old bones, and she coughed at night. A dry cough Vance didn't like to hear, because an old woman's cough in the cold, without medicine, without real warmth, was another account running in the dark. Food tightened. The Benedetti's preserves dwindled. The chickens laid an egg every other day, fashioned among the kids. Vance started doing what his father did and what he'd forgotten in small-town life with a grocery store. The mountain gave food to those who knew how to ask. He set wire snares to catch armadillos and agoutis on the animal trails, which he read on the ground the way he read the trunk. Rediscovered pine nuts, which fell from the araucaria and cooked, filled the belly. Found good hearts of palm in a palm he felled. And it was the first time felling a tree went back to being what it always had been, food and warmth and not a weapon. And he felt in his hands, while cutting, something close to peace. He taught the kids everything, which leaf worked, which killed, how an armadillo digs and where it passes, how to recognize ripe pine nuts. Marina learned fast, serious. Pedro learned slow, but learned. And with each thing he learned became a little less broken, because busy hands fix the head. And Vance, who knew that since the first cedar chip in the dark, gave the kids work on purpose, real work, useful, because he understood that teaching survival was the form of love that world permitted. But the piece was borrowed, and the collection came with human feet. Day 23, Vance went down to the hillside edge again to read the land, as he and poor Renan had done, now alone. And what he saw at the colonel's fort made his neck go cold in the ugliest way yet. Movement, lots of it. The gang was organizing for something big. Pickups being loaded with armed men. And Vance squinted, recording. One of the men at the fort gate spread a map on a car hood and pointed toward the mountain upward, toward the direction of the house. And the others nodded. The 4-man patrol hadn't returned in 5 days. The colonel wasn't stupid. A patrol that doesn't return means one of 2 things. It died to zombies, or there are armed, dangerous people in that direction, hiding something worth defending. Of the 2, the second interested the colonel, because whoever defends has something worth taking. He was going to send not 4 men. He was going to send a whole gang. He was going to climb the mountain to see what killed his patrol and what was there to take. Vance backed from the edge slowly, without snapping a leaf, his head already working fast and cold, and the conclusion arrived whole and horrible before he even returned to the house. The old man's house, with its funnel and its tree and its can line, stopped a 4-man patrol, stopped a handful of dead. It didn't stop 30 armed men who knew roughly where to look and had time and ammo. Sooner or later, with numbers, they'd take the funnel or surround the slope or simply wait. And whoever waits beats whoever is trapped inside a house with 2 children, a sick old woman, and food for a few days. The house that had been the perfect refuge had become a trap, with them inside. And for the first time since he fled up the mountain, Vance understood, with his chest sinking, that he was going to have to do the thing that hurt most for a man who had lost everything and built with his own hands a single safe place in the world. He was going to have to leave his father's house. Again, he was going to have to take his daughter, and now one more child and an old woman, and flee where he didn't know yet. But when, the colonel was going to decide for him, and the clock Vance didn't have was ticking anyway, marking on everyone's body, counting down. Mrs. Inez's cough turned into something else on the night of day 24. Vance woke to the sound of it. It wasn't the dry, cold cough anymore. It was wet, deep, with a wheeze underneath, and when he lit the candle stub and put his hand on the old woman's neck, the heat that rose from her skin answered the question before he asked. Fever. Real fever, the kind the body raises to fight something big. Pneumonia, she said, herself hoarse, when the cough gave a break. She smiled sideways, the smile of someone who'd spent 40 years giving diagnoses and now gave her own. I know the sound, son. Heard it all my life in other people's chests. Now it's in mine. What do we have? Vance was already on his feet, rummaging the Benedetti's medicine box in his head before opening. Is there antibiotic left? There isn't. Mrs. Inez closed her hand on his sleeve, weak. The girl finished it all, remember? I was the one who told her to finish it all. Medicine gets finished. The smile again, now with an undertone of irony that hurt. I myself taught you to leave me with nothing. It's right. It was her life or my chance. It was the right call. I do it again. Vance stood in the dark, candle in hand, and the woods part inside him did the horrible math he didn't want to do. A nearly 70-year-old woman with pneumonia, no antibiotics, in July cold, in a house they had to leave in days to flee 30 armed men. The math didn't close in any way. The math said one thing only, and the thing the math said he wasn't going to accept hearing. There's still antibiotics in the world, he said. There's pharmacies. There's clinics. The Clearwater Village, down here on the west slope, has a small health post. Tiny, far from Pine Brook and far from the colonel. I'm going there tomorrow morning. Get whatever there is. Vance. Her voice got hard, the ordering voice he already knew from Teresa, from women who knew things. You're going to risk your life, and by extension, the lives of those 2 kids who depend only on you now to fetch medicine for an old woman who anyway won't survive the escape coming our way? She shook her head. No, you won't. I forbid it. You don't have the right. Pedro is yours now. Marina is yours. You can't die in a pharmacy for me. You don't decide what I do with my risk. I do, when your risk is also theirs. She coughed long, and when she stopped, she was out of breath, but didn't drop the argument, because she was an old nurse, and an old nurse wins arguments even to dying. Listen to me, because I don't have much breath to spend. I've seen too many people die to be afraid of my turn. What I won't endure, and her voice failed here for the first time, is become the reason 2 kids are left without the only adult left. You understand me? I'd rather go 1,000 times this way, warm in a bed with kids beside me, than be the excuse for your stupid death. Don't give me that weight. I already carry too much to take. Vance didn't answer, blew out the candle, lay down again. But he didn't sleep, and she knew he didn't sleep, and the 2 stayed there in the dark, each pretending for the other, until the first light. And in the first light, Vance took the pack, 2 of the colonel's rifles, the ammo, and went to the Clearwater Village anyway. Not because the old woman was wrong. She was right in the cold math. Absolutely right. He went because he'd understood something in the 3 longest weeks of his life, that if he started letting the cold math decide everything, who's worth the risk, who produces, who gets left behind, he would become slowly, chip by chip, the same thing the colonel was. And then nothing would be left inside him worth saving. And Marina would grow up raised by a man who'd already died inside. He went for the medicine, not only for Mrs. Inez. He went to keep being the kind of man who goes for the medicine. It was the only thing, besides his daughter, he still had to defend. The piece of him that hadn't turned animal. The Clearwater Village was a handful of houses and a 1-room health post on the west slope, and it was dead. Dead in the empty sense. No movement, no walking, dead in sight. Which was worse, because too much silence means there's something that hasn't shown itself yet. Vance entered the post through the back window, silent, axe in hand, rifle on his back. Rifle he'd only use in desperation, because a gunshot calls everything within kilometers. The little room was tossed, already looted by hands before his, drawers on the floor, the medicine cabinet wide open and almost empty. Almost. At the back of the cabinet, fallen behind a box of syringes, a vial of injectable, and a pamphlet. Vance took it, read in the window light with furrowed brow. He wasn't a pharmacist, but Mrs. Inez had taught him to read labels. It was antibiotic, one of the strong ones, injectable, glass vial with the dust of something forgotten. 3 vials, and providence or irony, a handful of sealed syringes on the floor. It was exactly what could save pneumonia, if he got there in time, if Mrs. Inez knew how to administer. And she did. She did it with her eyes closed. Vance closed his hand on the vial, and that was when he heard from the house next door a sound that wasn't the dead. Crying, a chuckle, muffled, held back, the way that world taught. He stopped mid-motion of putting the vials away. The woods part inside him said cold and clear, "Not your problem. You have what you came for. There's an old woman dying up top, and 2 kids depending on you. Every minute here is risk. Leave. Don't look. This isn't what you came for." And the other part, the part that had come here against all the math, precisely so he wouldn't turn animal. That part made him set down the pack and go to the wall that divided the post from the house next door and listen. The crying and a woman's voice, very low, trying to soothe. "Shh, shh. The man's leaving soon. Be quiet. Be quiet." So the man leaves. She'd heard Vance. She was hiding with the child, terrified of him, thinking he was the kind of man the world was now full of, the colonel's kind. Vance closed his eyes, weighed everything on a scale that had no good plate. If he showed himself, he could scare them more. It could be a trap. There could be an armed man waiting. It could delay him. It could cost his life, and by extension, his children's lives up top. The cold math screamed to leave and pretend he didn't hear. There were too many people in the world to save. Saving everyone was dying. But he also knew, with the same clarity, that leaving while hearing that crying, pretending a hidden child's crying was nothing, was background noise, was someone else's problem, was taking the first step toward becoming the man he'd sworn not to become. It was the first chip. He made a decision that wasn't the safe one or the heroic one, but the one he could live with after. He didn't enter. He didn't risk everything, but he spoke through the wall, quiet and clear, the gentlest voice he could put in a lumberjack's armed body. "Ma'am, I'm not coming in. I'm not going to hurt you or your child." Pause, letting the voice settle. "I'm a father. I'm fleeing from the gas station gang, same as you probably are. I only came to get medicine for a sick old woman. I already got it. I'm leaving now." He took from the pack one of the 3 vials. Just one, because he needed 2, but one he could give. And giving what hurts is what separates giving from having extra. And 2 cans of food, and set them on the ground against the dividing wall where she'd find them. "I am leaving here beside you a little food and a medicine in case you need it. The village is clear of creatures for now, but it won't stay that way. Take your child and get into the thick woods before dark. Creatures can't climb slopes. Remember that. Creatures can't climb slopes. Could save your life." Silence from the other side. The crying had stopped. "God bless you," the woman's voice came finally, in a breath cracked with surprise and disbelief. "God bless you, mister." Vance didn't answer. He took the pack, the 2 remaining vials, and left through the back window and climbed back up the mountain fast before the heart. Not the heart. He wasn't going to think about heart. Before the foolish desire to stay and help more, which was a desire that killed, beat the cold desire to live, which was the one keeping his daughter breathing. He never knew what became of that woman and that child. One more stone in the pocket, the not knowing kind. But this stone, unlike the others, he didn't regret carrying. It was a stone that proved there was still a man in there, not just a survivor. And in that world, Vance discovered climbing the ridge with vials in his pocket and his heart, his soul rather, half mended. That was worth the risk. It was worth almost everything. Real hunger arrived on day 25. And real hunger isn't the desire to eat. It's something else. The Benedetti's pantry had run out. The chickens laid an egg every 2 days, rationed for the kids. The nearest Araucaria's pine nuts had all been gathered. The wire snares on the animal trails had been empty for 3 days. The dead passing through the mountain had scared off the game, or eaten it, or just scared it. And the agouti and armadillo disappeared from the map. Beans for 3 days, maybe 4 stretching, and they had an escape ahead. A day and a half of walking through the Stone Gorge with a sick old woman and 2 kids, and making that crossing on an empty stomach was offering the mountain the chance to kill everyone from weakness before any dead one got close. Vance already felt in his own head what hunger did. The dizziness when standing fast, the irritation that rose over nothing. He caught himself almost sharp with Marina over something stupid and had to stop, breathe, apologize, because he knew it wasn't him talking. It was the lack of food talking. And a man who lets hunger talk for him makes bad decisions. And bad decisions, they're killed. Hunger wasn't just stomach. It was a thin poison in the head, blurring judgment right when judgment was the only thing between them and the end. "I have to go down one more time," he told Mrs. Inez in a half voice, while she injected herself with the second of 3 shots, breathing, still wheezing, but fever a thread lower. Get food that holds for the trip. Can't cross the gorge with what we have. He was already separating the empty pack, rope, machete. There's a small market on the old Pine Brook Road up top, the late Adams, far from the square, far from the Colonel. There might be dry goods left, rice, salt, sugar, flour, things that fill and last, and might be full of dead. The old woman said, markets are full of old food smell. They like markets. I know. Vance closed the pack. That's why I'm going in the morning, with light, alone, light, fast. Look from far off first. If there's too many, I don't go in. I promise I don't go in if there's too many. It was a promise he already knew he might not be able to keep because hunger talked, and hunger said, go in. And hunger was convincing. The late Adams Market was still standing on the edge of the upper road with the roll-down door half open, and in front of it, in the dirt lot, Vance understood why there was still stuff inside. It had guardians. They were scattered across the lot and the sidewalk. About 8, 10, standing, swaying in place, trapped there by the old food smell leaking from the store with no reason to leave, no intelligence to enter and serve themselves, just staying as they stay, wearing down, rotting, standing under the winter sun, guarding the treasure without knowing they guarded, without knowing anything. Vance crouched behind an abandoned car at the road entrance for a long time and did the cold reading. 10. 10 was death for a man alone, but 10, standing, stupid, deaf to everything that wasn't sound and movement, spread out. That wasn't an army. It was a geometry problem, like everything. And hunger, talking inside him, said that there, behind that half-open roll-down door, was what would get his daughter through the Stone Gorge alive. Worth the risk. Hunger said it was worth it. And this time, he thought, dangerously, that hunger was right. He did what he'd learned to do better than anything, used sound against them. He'd brought from up top, without saying what for, a pair of things. The old bicycle horn from Harlan's shed, the rubber kind you squeezed and made a honk and a cord. He tied the horn to a pole on the other side of the lot, far from the store door, and ran the cord under a car to his hiding spot. The way he ran the tree rope to the window, he squeezed the cord. The horn honked, loud, strange, from the other side. The 10 turned together and went, slow but all of them, toward the honk, leaving the store door opening a corridor. Vance squeezed again, to be based, keeping the sound alive, drawing them far away, to the opposite corner of the lot, piling them there against the pole, confused, looking for the flesh the sound promised and wasn't there. And then he ran, crouched, fast, on the edge of his foot as far as he could, and in total silence when he couldn't, cross the lot on the clean diagonal and slid under the half-open roll-down door into the store's dark, with the heart, not the heart, with breath held and machete in hand and hunger saying fast, fast, take everything. Inside, dim light and the smell of spoiled food and rats, shelves overturned, the bulk already taken by hands before his. But the late Adam kept things in the back, in storage, and the storage had been forgotten by the hurried looters. Vance filled the pack in the dark, fast, by touch and the little light. 2 kilos of rice in a torn sack he tied, a package of salt. Salt, gold. Salt preserves meat and replaces what sweat takes. Sugar, clumped, but good. Flour, a stick of cured sausage hanging high that still held up. Cans, 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 filled until the pack weighed what a man could run carrying, no more, because weight that doesn't run there kill. And it was when he had turned to leave that he heard from the dark corner of the storage the wheeze. There was one inside, one only, but inside, close between him and the door. Must have been the late Adam himself, or a looter who didn't get out in time, trapped in the store for who knows how long. And the honk out there now didn't serve for this one. This one had a living sound and movement and smell right in front of it. Vance. It came. In the dark, clumsy, knocking over a shelf. Vance had no room to step back or swing the axe, only the machete and the wall at his back. He waited. Wait for their step. Let them reach range, strike sideways to the head with force and economy. But in the dark, he missed the first blow, caught the shoulder, and the thing fell on him, and the mouth came, and Vance felt the butcher shop breath and the cold hand closing on his arm. And for one white second of panic, the hunger and the dark and the smell almost beat judgment. It was the woods part that saved, the cold part that even in panic calculates. He didn't fight the thing's strength. He threw himself with it, let them both fall, rolled under the weight, the way he'd rolled under Dave on the first day, put the machete handle across against the biting mouth, and with the other hand groped the ground, found a heavy fallen can, and hit and hit and hit the thing's head until it stopped. There in the dark of the late Adam's storage, without seeing clearly what he was doing, only feeling it give. When he stopped, he was drenched in cold sweat and something that wasn't sweat, panting, with the food pack still on his back. Alive, not bitten, checked in the dark. The skin on his arms with trembling fingers looking for a tear and didn't find. Not bitten. The thick flannel shirt had held the hand's grip, and the teeth hadn't reached skin by a hair because of the shirt Teresa had bought him 2 winters ago, complaining he walked around looking like a vagrant. Her shirt saved him. Vance almost laughed in the dark and almost cried, and did neither, because the horn out there had stopped calling long ago, and the 10 in the lot would be losing interest, turning back toward the store smell, toward him. He came out under the door, dragging the heavy pack, rolled out, stood. The 10 were already coming back, slow, drawn again by the sound of the fight inside that had leaked out. Vance didn't face them. He ran on the clean diagonal that still existed, to the car, to the road, to the climb, and a living leg climbs a ridge, and a dead leg doesn't. And that was the last and best truth of the new world. And he climbed the mountain with 10 dead falling behind on the slope. Falling, trying, falling, and the pack full of rice and salt and sausage, and life beating against his back with every step. He reached the top before noon, drenched, trembling from the adrenaline running, with food to cross the stone gorge. Marina ran to him at the funnel entrance, and he held her with his arm, and over her shoulder he saw Mrs. Inez at the door, leaning on the jamb because she couldn't stand long anymore, looking at him with that knowing look. And she read in his face and clothes everything that had happened down there, and said nothing in front of the kids. Only later, quietly, when he dropped the pack and the 2 were alone for a moment, "You went in even though there was too many. You promised you wouldn't go in if there was too many, and you went in." "I went in." Vance didn't apologize. Hunger spoke louder than the promise. And this time, hunger was right, Mrs. Inez. "Look." He pointed to the food. "This gets the kids across alive. It was worth it." The old woman looked at the food, looked at him, and instead of a scolding, what came was something heavier, said with the tired sweetness of someone who didn't have much time left to soften anything. "It was worth it today." She coughed, deep. But a day comes, son, for every man who survives this way, when hunger is always right, when everything's worth the risk, when everyone's a threat, when going into the dark armed is just Tuesday. Her eyes, feverish, held as steady. That day is the day you stop being you and become something else. I won't be here to warn you when it comes. So be your own watchman for that, the same way you watch the trail. Your hunger is right most times, but the day it's right all times, doubt it. It's the only thing that still separates you from the man you killed in the head at the gas station, and that you're going to have to kill for real, sooner or later. She put her hand on his face. Raise these kids with a man inside, Vance, not with just a survivor. A survivor alone isn't worth saving. Vance stored that, along with the lesson of blood and the medicine you finish and the tree that falls where you're told. He stored it in the most protected part of his head, the one he reserved for the things that kept his daughter alive, because he understood that Mrs. Inez, that afternoon, with the food stolen from death spread on the floor between them, had taught him the last and hardest survival technique of all. Not the one of keeping the body alive, the one of keeping alive inside the body the man worth keeping alive. Mrs. Inez injected the shot in her own arm herself, because her hand was steady for it and Vance's wasn't. No use looking at me with that face, she said, fitting the vial into the syringe with fingers that knew the path by heart. Antibiotic isn't a miracle, it's time. Gives me a few more days, maybe. Maybe holds the pneumonia, maybe just slows it. In a young body it would fix it, in mine. In the cold, without IV, without oxygen. She shrugged, stuck the needle, pushed slow. You did what you could, bought time. Now don't waste the time you bought watching over me. You have an escape to prepare. Vance prepared the escape. In those days, 25, 26, his body's clock never stopping its count, he turned everything he had into something that moved. He couldn't take the house, but he could take what the house taught. He made 2 cargo packs on the frame, divided the weight, thinking about who carried, the heavy on him, the medium split between him and nobody. Because Marina and Pedro were kids and Mrs. Inez barely walked, treated water in bottles marked with charcoal, dried food, cooked pine nuts, sausage, whatever was left of preserves, the medicine box. The toolbox reduced only essentials because tools weigh and he had to choose. And choosing which tool to leave was like pulling a tooth. He kept his father's axe, the small bow saw, machete, file, ropes, wire, steel tape measure. He left the chainsaw, heavy, loud, hungry for fuel. It hurt to leave, but weight that doesn't move is weight that kills. He studied the route on the map he had in his head better than any paper map. The North Trail, the one marked in orange, descended on the opposite slope from Pine Brook and the Colonel, plunged into thick old growth, crossed a narrow stone gorge, and led, after a full day of walking, to a place Vance knew from his logging days. An old forest fire observation post abandoned for years on top of a bare hill with 360-degree views, a wooden tower and a stone cabin at the base. Spring water and, what mattered most, surrounded by steep slopes on all sides. Another place dead legs don't climb, another natural funnel. It wasn't salvation. Vance no longer believed in salvation. It was just the next defensible place. And in the life he now lived, the next defensible place was everything you could want. We leave the day after tomorrow at dawn before sunup, he told Mrs. Inez at night, quietly, to not wake the kids. You'll hold on. I'll make a stretcher, pull you on the bad stretches. We'll go slow. Get there in a day, day and a half." The old woman looked at him a while in the ember light, and Vance knew too well that kind of look to like it. It was Teresa's look at the clinic, the look of someone who's already done the math the other person doesn't want to do. "You're not pulling a stretcher with an old woman on top through a stone gorge with 2 kids along, fleeing an armed gang," she said. "Gentle, you know that. I taught you to do body math, son. Do mine." She coughed, and the cough was worse, and they both heard it was worse. "But not today. Today let's pretend it's going to work. Tomorrow we talk straight. Go sleep some. You're a wreck." There was no day after tomorrow. The colonel came on day 27 in the middle of the afternoon, and he didn't come to negotiate. Vance was in the yard tying the last load when he heard it. Not the can line. They were still far off at the mountain's base. It was the sound he feared more than any dead one's wheeze. Engine. Several pickups climbing the skid trail down there, heading for the curve where the F-150 was hidden, and men's voices, many with no care about noise, because whoever has 30 armed men doesn't walk on tiptoe. They came up confident. They came up to take, and there was something else in the air, under the sound of engines, that made Vance's blood, not the blood he wasn't going to, made Vance's neck go cold in a new way. The murmur, that wet, collective murmur he'd heard in the Pinebrook Square on the first day. The engines and voices and shots the colonel's men fired to clear a path, all of that, descending the valley, climbing the mountain, had done what sound always does. It had called the dead, many from everywhere, and the dead were climbing behind the noisy living like flies follow a butcher, slow, stupid, tireless, in numbers. They were all climbing the same ridge, the same funnel, the same house, where there was a lumberjack, 2 children, and a dying old woman. Vance stood on the roof for 3 seconds that felt like a lifetime, and the woods part inside him, the cold part that measured slopes and red trunks and calculated falls, opened its eyes and looked at that not as a sentence, but as what it had always been to him on the whole mountain, a geometry problem of weight, leverage, and fall, a problem of making big things fall where he told them. The men came from below, making noise. The dead came behind the men, behind the noise, and between them and the house was a single narrow trail, a funnel of rock and cliff and big trees on the high edges. And Vance knew every one of those trees by name and knew exactly where each would fall if he told it to. He came down from the roof, hand steady, voice steady, grief after, always after. "Marina, Pedro." They looked at him and saw his face and went quiet. "Listen with every ounce of your life, because I'm going to say this once. Something big and ugly is going to happen here today. Bad men are coming from below and lots of dead behind them." He knelt in front of the 2 kids, a hand on each shoulder, "and I am going to use the whole mountain against them. Everything I know, every tree on this hill is going to fall where I tell it. But for that to work, you 2 have to do exactly what I say. When I say it, no questions, no crying now, no looking back. Can you do that for me?" Marina took Pedro's hand, looked at her father with her mother's eyes. "We can, Dad," she said. "Tell us what to do." And Mrs. Inez from the bed, with a voice hoarse from fever, but suddenly without any tremor, as if the proximity of the end had cleansed her of all fear, said, "And tell me what to do too, lumberjack, because I did my math long ago, and for the first time in this whole wrong world, a dying old woman's math adds up perfectly with what needs to be done." She smiled, and it was a terrible, beautiful smile. "Let me be useful one last time. Give me a job. It's the only thing I ask." Vance looked at her, understood what she offered. It hurt like few things had hurt. And because he loved the old woman enough to honor her will, and because the math, the damned cold math, said she was right, he nodded slowly once and began to speak, fast and clear, the plan that would cost everyone, all at once, everything that hell had taught them. The plan was a lumberjack's plan, and it was simple as every good felon: make big things fall where he told them, and let gravity and hunger do the rest. The trail climbed to the house through a single stone corridor. The funnel, with a cliff wall on one side and a thorn cliff on the other, narrow enough for two men to pass shoulder to shoulder, no more. It was the only way. Everything that climbed, man or dead, had to pass through there. Vance had already dropped one tree in that narrows once, against the patrol. Now he was going to drop 3 at the funnel's bottom mouth, where the corridor began. A big pine on the high edge, with the notch already cut, the hinge weakened, the rope hidden in his hand. This was the bottom plug. Dropped at the right moment, it closed the exit and trapped whoever was inside the corridor. In the middle of the funnel, an old araucaria, the biggest on the hill, also prepared. This was the middle plug. And up at the top, at the upper mouth, near the house yard, Mrs. Inez. She wasn't going to carry weight, wasn't going to run, wasn't going to cross a stone gorge. She was going to do the only thing her body still did well, and that was, in that horrible geometry, the piece that held everything. She was going to make noise. She was going to be the living flesh at the top of the funnel, the beacon the men wanted to take and the dead wanted to eat, the magnet that pulled both into the corridor, into the narrows, into the exact spot where Vance would make the trees fall. Without her calling from above, the men could spread out, retreat, surround the slope at leisure. With her calling, they climbed blindly up the funnel after the target, and the dead climbed behind the men, and everyone piled into the only inch of ground where the whole mountain was going to collapse. "You bang on the iron kettle, hard, rhythmic. Don't stop," Vance said, voice low and fast, adjusting the old woman seated in the yard chair, single-shot shotgun in her lap and 4 shells in her hand. "When they enter the lower corridor, you don't stop for anything. The more noise, the more they climb, the more together they get. You're the bait." He swallowed. "And when I drop the middle one and I yell your name, you stop banging. You go inside the house, you lock the cinnamon bar, and you don't come out again. The house is hardwood. It holds. I'll come get you when I can." Mrs. Inez took his hand. Her eyes were lucid, feverish, and calmer than his. "You're a good liar for kids, lumberjack," she said, gentle. "But with me it doesn't stick. I'm not going to manage to get up and lock anything, and we both know it. I can barely get out of this chair." She squeezed his hand with the little strength she had. "But I'm going to bang on that kettle like I've never banged anything in my life. I'm going to make a racket that gathers every dead body and every bandit on this mountain into your corridor. And when there's nothing left, I've got 4 shots and a single shot, and the last," she smiled, "the last we don't waste, right? You taught me to finish what you start. Medicine gets finished. Life too. When the time comes, we finish with our own hands, the clean way, without letting it turn into something that walks around." She pulled him by the collar, kissed his sweaty forehead the way a mother does. "Go take care of your children, son. I'll take care of up here." For the first time in this whole wrong world, a useless old woman is worth exactly what she needs to be worth. Don't take that from me. It's the most beautiful thing I'll have left to do." Vance couldn't answer. There was a knot no blade could cut. He just put his hand on her warm face for an instant, recorded that face, and went to do his part. Because his part was the only thing that could still save who could be saved. Marina and Pedro were already at the North Trail mouth, packs on their backs, hidden behind the big rock, with the order that was worth their lives. When Dad yells, "Now," you go down the Orange Trail together, holding hands, and don't stop, and don't come back for anything. Even if you hear shots, even if you hear Dad yell again, even if you hear Mrs. Inez, for anything. And if Dad doesn't make the Stone Gorge before dark, you go on alone to the observation post, follow the orange tape, and live. That's the order, the only order that matters. The Colonel's men entered the funnel at 4 in the afternoon, and the kettle started banging. Vance, lying on the high edge with the bottom plug rope in hand, watched everything with the coldness of the woods. They came in single file through the corridor, because the corridor didn't let them come any other way, rifles raised, cursing, drawn by the metallic, stubborn sound of the old woman up there, who banged, rhythmic as a church bell, calling. 15 men entered the Narrows. The Colonel in back, Vance recognized him by posture, by the way of a man who commands, staying in the rear, sending others first, as that kind always does. And down below, at the funnel's bottom mouth, behind the men, the first of the dead appeared on the trail, then another, then the river. Vance waited. The woods part inside him counted the fall time, measured the angle, felt the wind. There was no wind, still day like the first day, and he thanked the mountain for that. Waited for all the men to pass the bottom plug point, waited for the dead to get close enough to the mouth that when the tree fell behind the men, it wouldn't seal them outside. It would seal them inside, with the dead already in the corridor with them. When the last man passed and the first dead entered, he cut the hinge with 2 axe blows and pulled the rope. The bottom plug pine groaned and came down across and sealed the funnel mouth in a crash, and 3 or 4 dead were crushed under it, and the rest of the river of dead piled against the fallen trunk and started overflowing over it, slow, tireless, into the corridor. The men, trapped between the fallen trunk behind and the house ahead, turned to the crash and saw what came over the tree, and panic began. They did what armed men with panic do. They fired, and the shot in the stone funnel echoed, and the echo called even more dead from the whole mountain. And Mrs. Inez's kettle didn't stop banging up above, adding to the noise, pulling, and the funnel became a cauldron of shots, echoes, wheezes, and screams, and the dead poured over the trunk in a flow without end, because the number had no end. And dead legs don't climb ridges, but in the flat of the narrow corridor, dead legs walked and walked on top of the living, and the living had nowhere to run. Vance ran down the high edge to the middle plug point, the old Araucaria. The men now, some tried to scale the thorn cliff to escape the corridor, and that was exactly what the second tree would prevent. He cut the hinge, pulled. The Araucaria, the biggest on the hill, the one he'd known by name since boyhood, groaned its long groan of tearing fiber and fell across the middle of the funnel, splitting the corridor in 2, sealing the escape through the only stretch where the cliff lowered, trapping most of the men in the cauldron with the dead. It fell exactly where he told it. 30 years of craft in a single perfect fall, and it was the most terrible and most accurate fall of his life. "Inez!" Vance shouted, with every ounce of breath in his chest, the agreed signal. Inez, now, get inside. Up above, the kettle stopped. There was a second of silence inside the roar, a hole of silence just hers, and Vance, already running toward the children, didn't see heard, and the whole mountain heard. The old nurse's hoarse and steady voice without any fear, shouting to the cauldron of dead bandits below the last thing she had to give the world, which wasn't a prayer or a farewell. It was a challenge. Up here, you sons of bitches. Come get the old woman. Come. And the kettle started again, stronger, faster, louder than before, because she wasn't going to go inside and lock the door. She was never going inside. And Vance knew in that instant, with his chest tearing as he ran, that she had lied to him the way he lied to the kids out of love. So he would do what he had to do without the weight. She was going to bang on that kettle, calling death to her until the end, to keep the cauldron boiling in the funnel, to give Vance and the children every second she could still buy with her own body. And after, when there was nothing left, she had 4 shots and a single shot, and the last you don't waste. Vance ran. He didn't look back. It was the order he'd given the kids. And it was time for him to obey his own order, because looking back wouldn't save the old woman and could kill the living. He ran to the big rock where Marina and Pedro waited holding hands, eyes wide with terror and courage, and the kettle banged behind him, and banged and banged. Now, he shouted, arriving. Go, run, don't stop, don't look, go. The kids went down the orange trail the way Vance taught, holding hands on the edge of their feet, not screaming fast. He went behind, closing the rear, his father's axe in hand, and for a moment, just a moment, it looked like it was going to work. That was when the colonel appeared on the high edge. He hadn't stayed in the cauldron. That kind of man never stays where he sends others. When the first tree fell, he'd backed off, climbed the thorn cliff by the only point that still worked, before the second tree closed, tearing clothes and skin on thorns, and had gone around the funnel from above, alone, with a revolver in his hand and hate where others have fear. He'd seen Vance run. He'd understood there was something to protect in that direction, and he went after, not the dead, not the house, but the children, because he understood with the dirty cunning that made him colonel of nothing, that hurting what the lumberjack protected was the only way to beat a man who just dropped a mountain on his gang. Hey! The colonel shouted and fired the revolver, and the bullet chipped the rock a palm from Pedro's head. Vance turned, didn't think. His body decided the way it decided on the first day before the twisting tree. He put himself between the gun barrel and the children with his whole body. Marina, Pedro, run for the gorge. Don't stop, he roared, and advanced on the colonel because standing still was getting shot, and the only chance of an axe against a revolver was closing the distance before the man aimed right. The colonel fired again. The bullet hit Vance, not in the chest, a graze on the left shoulder, a fire line that spun his body half a palm but didn't drop him, because a lumberjack's body is a body that takes standing what would drop another. He didn't stop, got close. The third shot went skyward, because Vance already had the man's wrist in his hand, and the two tangled at the cliff edge, on the brink of the fall to the creek below, fighting for the revolver and the axe. Two big men rolling on rock and root, and the world became only that, only weight and strength and the smell of sweat and blood and powder. The colonel was strong and dirty. He kneed, fingered the eye, headbutted. But Vance was a lumberjack, and a lumberjack is made of a strength that isn't Jim's strength. It's 20 years of lifting what doesn't lift, and was also now a man protecting the only thing he had left in the world, and that strength has no name and has no end while there's something left to defend. He pinned the gun arm against the rock and smashed the man's wrist on the edge until the revolver flew free, tumbled down the cliff, disappeared, left the axe, and the axe was between the two, and both grabbed the hickory handle at the same time, and the fight became one thing: who guided the edge. That was when the colonel found Vance's left hand, the one from the shoulder wound, the weaker one in that instant, and twisted it off the handle and sank his teeth into it like one of the dead, with a living hate that was worse, and bit with the jaw strength of a desperate man, and Vance felt the finger bones give, crack, and the pain went up white and blind, and for 1 second the axe almost belonged to the colonel. Dad, Marina's voice. She disobeyed the only order that mattered. She'd come back. She'd heard the shot and her father scream, and couldn't not come back, because she was 11 years old and human and a daughter, and her courage was bigger than her obedience, and that was going to save Vance's life and cost her a thing that doesn't come back. She didn't scream again, didn't hesitate. She did what her father taught on the trail weeks ago about how you kill something that comes to kill you, sideways to the head, with everything you've got, and don't stop hitting. Except it wasn't a dead thing. It was a living man, and she had in her hands the small machete, the one her father gave her to keep. And she came from behind the colonel and drove the machete into the side of his neck, where her father taught that the structure gives and pulls, the way you open what has to be opened, with a strength she didn't know she had. With her eyes closed, the colonel loosened, let go of Vance's hand, took both hands to his neck, turned to the girl with a surprise that was almost childlike, and Vance, free, with his left hand destroyed hanging, raised his father's axe with his right hand, the good hand, the hand of 30 years of craft, and did, one last time that day, the thing he knew how to do better than any man on the mountain. The colonel fell. This time he stayed down, and there was silence on the high edge. Only the cauldron roaring below in the funnel, distant now, another world. Only the two of them breathing in short gasps. Only Marina standing, machete still in hand, her hand and arm wet with blood that wasn't hers, eyes open now, fixed on the dead man, with an expression on her face Vance had never seen on his daughter, and prayed his whole life to never see again, and saw again in many nights, in the dream of both. Marina! His voice came hoarse, urgent, the voice that pulls someone back from where they've gone. Marina, look at me, sweetheart, not at him. Here! He knelt in front of her, with his good hand turned the girl's face away from the dead man, the way he'd covered her vision at the clinic weeks and a lifetime ago. You saved me. You hear me? You saved your father. He was going to kill me and then kill you and Pedro after, and you didn't let him. You did the hardest thing there is, and you did it right. His voice shook, and he let it shake, because there were things you couldn't say with a steady voice. It's not your fault. Hear me, it never will be. Put it on me, all of it. I carry it. It's a father's job to carry. Give me the machete. She gave the machete. Her hand was trembling. He threw the machete far, hugged his daughter to his chest with his good arm, and she finally broke. Not the quiet crying of the new world, but a child's cry, loud, ugly, whole, her first real cry in 3 weeks. And Vance let her cry loud for the first time, because the dead were all in the funnel, far away, and because there were things that needed to come out with sound, no matter the cost. And this was one of them. Up above, in the direction of the house, The kettle had stopped long ago, and while Vance held his daughter, there sounded, spaced, dry from above, one shot. Pause, another long pause, another. And then, after a pause that lasted the lifetime of an old nurse who had decided how she would end and ended, the fourth and last shot. And then only the roar of the dead in the funnel, and the girls crying, and the wind that finally began to blow on the mountain, cold, carrying the smell of powder and smoke downhill. Mrs. Inez had finished what she started, the clean way, without letting it turn into something that walks around. Vance closed his eyes for an instant. He had no phrase for her, nothing round or profound. He had only his destroyed hand throbbing, and his daughter trembling in his arms, and Pedro arriving now on the trail, coming back too, disobedient too, clinging to both of them. And the three stayed there on the high edge for a short time. That was all the time they had. Three living people stuck to each other on top of a mountain that burned. Then Vance opened his eyes, because the woods part inside him, the one that never slept, told the same truth as always, the only one that mattered. The living have to walk. Grief is after, always after. Get up, he said low to the children and to himself. We have to go. They'll take a while to get out of that funnel, but they'll get out. And I need to take care of this hand before it rots, or it kills me slower than any of them. He stood, staggered, steadied. He tucked his ruined hand inside his shirt against his chest, the way Mrs. Inez taught to immobilize, picked up his father's axe from the ground with his good hand. The Stone Gorge is that way. One day's walk. We'll go slow, but we'll go, holding hands, and don't look back. He looked at the two. Today, nobody looks back. The walk to the Stone Gorge took the rest of that day, and Vance's hand had almost took him. They went slow, as he'd said, holding hands in the dark that fell early, the orange trail marking the way, tree to tree. Vance went in front with the axe in his good hand, the bad hand inside his shirt against his chest. And every hour that passed, the bad hand talked louder. It wasn't just the broken finger bones from the colonel's bite. It was the bite itself, teeth of a living man, which is filth, dirtier than dog teeth, full of the rot of a mouth that ate badly and brushed nothing for weeks. Vance knew what it was Mrs. Inez had taught. Spreading redness, heat, a red line climbing the vein. He already felt the heat, already saw in the last candle's light the line starting to climb from wrist to forearm. And there was the other fear, the one he didn't tell the kids, the one he chewed alone all night in the Stone Gorge where they camped. What if he turned? The colonel was alive when he bit. A dead one's bite killed and resurrected. A living man's bite only killed and, slowly, from infection. Vance repeated to himself, in the dark, everything he'd learned from his own body in 3 weeks. Renin died without turning because he wasn't bitten by a dead one. The Benedettis stayed. It's the dead one's bite, the dead one's blood, the dead one's fluid in the wound. The colonel was a man, a living man. His bite rots, but doesn't resurrect. He repeated that until he almost believed it, and still slept with the machete within reach of his good hand, just in case, with a cold and horrible plan stored in case his fever turned into the other thing before he could treat the arm. A plan to protect the children from what he might become, the same way he'd protected Marina from her mother at the clinic in another world. The fever rose, but it was infection fever, not the other. By morning, he was still himself. And then Vance did the hardest thing his hands had ever done. and they'd done terrible things. At the place where they camped, with the spring water from the gorge boiled over the fire, with the machete cleaned in the fire until it glowed, with the Benedetti's wine for cleaning and the sewing thread and needle from the kit. He treated his own hand. 2 fingers were beyond saving. The ring and pinky on his left hand, crushed by the bite and already darkening at the tips. The rot starting. And rot that starts in a finger climbs to the arm, and from the arm to the wrist, and kills the whole man to save 2 fingers that already died. Mrs. Inez had taught that too, without knowing she was teaching it for himself. Sometimes saving the body is cutting away the piece you've already lost fast, before what's dead takes along what still lives. He sent the kids to get water from the spring down below far, so they wouldn't see or hear, and told them to take their time, to fill all the bottles, to count the rings of a stone the way he taught, to count the rings of a trunk, slowly, skipping none, and alone, biting a piece of leather to keep from screaming and calling the dead. With his good hand and the red-hot machete, he did what had to be done. It won't be told here how, just as it wasn't told how for Teresa, because there are things a man does and doesn't tell and carries under the ground. But he did, and cauterized, and sewed the stump with the separate stitch the old woman taught, not on the side, never on top. Less force, son. It's a person, not a wedge. And then he passed out for a while, leaning against the rock. And when he woke, the kids were back, sitting nearby, silent, guarding his sleep, with full bottles and big eyes. And neither of them asked anything, because the 3 had already learned together which questions you don't ask. The 2 injectable antibiotic vials, the ones he'd risked his life to fetch from Clearwater, the ones Mrs. Inez refused, the ones left because she died before accepting them. Vance injected into himself in his own arm with the syringe, clumsily as he could with one hand, missing the vein, hitting the muscle, but going in. And it was like that, lying in the cold stone gorge, with the medicine he'd gone to get for another person entering his own blood, that he understood one of the few things that world taught him that weren't just pain, that the good you do for others, even when it seems wasted, even when the person dies and refuses, that good comes back through crooked paths, and sometimes is the only thing left between you and the end. He'd gone to get it to save Mrs. Inez's life. Mrs. Inez, in her way, had saved his. They reached the observation post on the 3rd day, thin, dirty, broken, alive. It was as Vance remembered. The wooden tower on the bare hilltop, the stone cabin at the base, the good spring water, and steep slopes on all sides, the natural funnel, the place dead legs don't climb. From the tower, you could see the whole surround round a mountain, 360 degrees, and you could see from far off, with days of advance, anything coming, man or dead. It wasn't salvation. Vance no longer believed in salvation and had stopped lying to himself about it. It was just the next defensible place, but it was high, dry, had water, and you could see danger coming. In that world, that was what passed for home. They spent days fixing the cabin the way Vance fixed his father's house a lifetime ago. A single door, bar across, shutters on the windows, can line on the only way up. Marina and Pedro knew everything now. They did it without being told. Walked on the edge of their feet, talked quiet, marked water with charcoal, finished what they started. Their hands, small, were already hands that knew things children's hands shouldn't know. That was the price, one of many. And Vance saw it every day and carried it every day. That his children, because Pedro was his child now, by the promise, and he kept the promise, had stopped being children in a single month of July, and that no defensible place in the world returned what had been taken from them. His hand healed crooked, 3 fingers where there had been 5 on the left. His father's axe he learned to hold in a new way, with the stump in the palm, and struck again with less force and more skill, the way he'd told Renan you strike, letting the weight of the iron do the work. A lumberjack with 3 fingers on one hand is still a lumberjack, but every time he gripped the hickory handle, what was missing remembered the kernel, remembered the cliff edge, remembered the machete in his 11-year-old daughter's hand, and her face after. The body marks time, the mind too. Vance carried both marks and didn't pretend to anyone that they didn't weigh. One night, weeks later, in the stone cabin with the fire lit and the wind hitting the tower up top, Vance finished the owl. He'd roughed the wings at his father's house in the dark of the first night. He'd set it aside the day Renan died. He'd carried the half-seater at the bottom of the pack through the stone gorge, through the ruined hand, through everything. And now, with 3 fingers on one hand and 5 on the other, slowly he carved the last thing missing from the cedar owl, the eyes. 2 round eyes, open, attentive. Owl eyes that see in the dark what others don't see. Eyes of someone who stays awake watching while others sleep. He called his daughter. Marina came, taller, thinner, Teresa's face clearer and clearer in hers, eyes too old. Vance put the finished owl in the girl's hand, the owl with eyes finally in place, and for a moment neither spoke. "Remember what I told you at your grandfather's house?" Vance said. Finally, his voice was hoarse, the way it got when he touched the things that hurt. That while the owl didn't have eyes, it was a sign we had work ahead, and that when I put the eyes on, it was because we were truly home. Marina looked at the owl, ran her thumb over the cedar eyes, and when she looked up at her father, there was a tear. But it wasn't only sadness. It was that difficult kind of tear that only comes when something is sad and good at the same time, and you can't separate the two. "But this isn't Grandpa's house," she said quietly. "Grandpa's house we lost. Mom we lost. Mrs. Inez, Renan." She swallowed. "This isn't home, Dad. It's just an old tower in the middle of nowhere." "It is." Vance didn't lie. He'd promised never to lie about what mattered, and that mattered more than anything. "The wooden house we lost. The people we lost, and they won't come back, and it hurts, and it will always hurt, and it's right to hurt. Whoever doesn't hurt for who they lost is dead inside." He took his daughter's hand, hers whole in his 3-fingered one, and closed both around the owl. "But home was never the wood, sweetheart. I put the eyes on the owl now, and it wasn't a lie." He looked at her and at Pedro, who had come quiet and leaned on them the way he did. "Home is this. It's you, it's Pedro, it's me. It's the 3 of us left alive together under the same roof, with water that has a charcoal mark and the door on the bar. As long as we have each other, we're home. Even if it's an old tower in the middle of nowhere, the owl's right. The eyes are in place. We made it." And it was the truest thing he knew how to say. And it was little, and it was everything. The world below didn't improve. Nobody came to rescue anyone. There was no rescue helicopter, no radio announcing a cure, no army clearing the mountain. The dead stayed there, rotting slowly over the months, joints locking, skin sinking, wearing down as everything wears down. But there were many, and new ones were always made, and the danger never left, only changed its face, the way it always did. Other living people crossed their path after, some good, most not, and each meeting was a new math to do, cold on the knife's edge. Between the distrust that kept you alive and the piece of humanity worth keeping alive, too. But they went on, day after day, marked on an increasingly thin, increasingly hard, increasingly wise body in the terrible things the world now demanded. The lumberjack and the 2 children life gave him in a crooked way, watching from the tower, rotating sleep, walking on tiptoe, finishing what they started, alive, broken in many places, marked in many others, each carrying their own pocket full of stones, and dead, but alive and together, which was the only victory that world let a man have. And that in the end of everything cost Vance almost everything he had, except the thing for which he would have paid that price 1,000 times over, without hesitation, with both hands, even knowing he'd have 1.5 left. The daughter, Ale, sleeping beside him, breathing slow in the dark, safe for one more night. Out there, the mountain, the wind in the pines, the real owl calling back off, in a world that had broken and wasn't going to fix itself. And in the sleeping girl's hand, the cedar owl, with eyes finally in place, watching the dark.